Hello everybody, today we're going to be breaking down the rest of the unfiction historical horror nightmare, the Monument Mythos. Now I've already made one video about the series, but if you haven't seen that video or haven't heard of the Monument Mythos, then a very short description that does not do the series justice is that the Monument Mythos is a historical fiction horror series that encapsulates American monuments and monsters that lie underneath them. It plays with elements like fictitious presidencies and conspiracies within the US government, as well as mythology, mass homicide, and Lovecraftian monsters. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, then stick around as we talk about the narrative that ties all of it together. The series has a ton of reoccurring characters and alternate timelines, and a lot of names and data to put together, but hopefully I can do that for you today. Now if you've never heard of the Mythos before and haven't seen my first video on it, preferably for one, I ask that you go to the description and check out the original series over on the Mr. Manticore channel. It's a fantastic watch and well worth your time. But if you just want to get on board here and check out the series later, then after the ad, I'm going to give a brief rundown of everything I covered in the first video. Because it's understandable if you don't want to take 3 hours of your time just to get context for this upload. I say that kind of as a joke, as it seems 3 hours means nothing to you people, considering that my first video on this topic has over 12 million views, making it the highest viewed video on my entire channel. And to that, I want to ask, is everything okay at home? But for real, I really appreciate the support that you guys showed me on the first video. I made that video over a year ago now, and it was when my channel was much smaller than it is now. So to see that many of you go back and support what I did then, it means the most. Thank you. And again, if you haven't heard of the Mythos and wonder why 12 million people consider it worth 3 hours of their time, then stick around. Also, how do you guys like the new corner? I'm probably going to get bored of this camera placement and change up the wall a couple dozen times, but this is what we're working with. It's got like the cute little window to set like the plushies up on and stuff, and then we've got real Wendigoon back there, and my record, shout out Post Malone, and all my whiteboards, which I'm sure you'll see more of in the future. I like it, I dig the vibe. So with all of that out of the way, let's get into a recap and breakdown of the Monument Mythos. But before we actually do that, and I corrupt your mind with ideas of giant monsters and abominations that eat people, let's talk about something that might actually help you instead. And that product that will make your life better is AG1. Despite what this Saudi penmanship may imply, I come to you today as a firm believer in the good news of AG1. And for a limited time, today's offer even includes a year's supply of vitamin D3 and K2 and 10 free days of AG1 in their convenient travel packs. More on that at the end. For those that don't know, AG1 is a dietary supplement that can assist in everything from your digestion to your immune system to your daily energy. And it does that not by being several different supplements and pills that you have to take every morning, and is instead just one drink. So now you can get your daily intake of things like citrates, B12, biotin, probiotics, and zinc in one easy step. Now those that have seen my previous AG1 ads will know that when I did the first ad for them, I hadn't yet seen the full effects of what the product can do. But after taking AG1 for several months now, I am a firm believer in whatever they're selling. I found that my daily energy has been better, I have found that I am more productive, and I can focus better to get tasks done. Now I'm not saying that AG1 is going to do the impossible. You're not going to drink this and immediately get fit and improve your lifestyle. But what I am saying is that AG1 is likely to give you the energy to do those things. Because as you watching a YouTube video essay right now, I'm going to take a bet and say that your diet isn't what it's supposed to be. Let AG1 do the hard part and worry about your body the way you should. Your AG1 will come in a bag like this, or you can do what I did and put it in this very aesthetic thermos to help with storage and refrigeration. So all that you have to do for AG1 is get 8 to 12 ounces of cold water, and from there just take a scoop of your AG1, dump it into the water, shake it up, and that's all it takes to start your day off right. Not only that, but as I've mentioned before, AG1 tastes just fine. It's just kind of a naturally sweet smelling flavor and is an excellent way to start your day. Now is the perfect time to start taking care of your body the right way. And if you do it right now, then you'll receive 2 free gifts. That is right, 2 free gifts. Because if you go to the link in the description now, for one, you will receive 5 days worth of AG1 and travel packs. But today, for a limited time only because AG1 and myself want you to have the best deal possible, if you head to that link in the description, you will get 10 free travel packs instead of 5. That's right, double your value for the same price. Today's a deal you definitely don't want to miss out on. And the other is a year's supply of vitamin D3 and K2, which all you have to do for that is put a drop of it in your AG1 every morning to start your day on an even better note. If you're missing out on AG1, then you're really missing out, and there's never been a better time to get in on the action. Again, let's go to the link in the description to receive your 2 free gifts and start on AG1 today. Thank you all so much for watching the ad. Thank you so much to AG1 for sponsoring the video. It really does mean the most. Hope you all check them out. Link is in the description, and we are back to the video. We are going to go ahead and get into it, but as always, thank you for watching. So in my first video, I covered Season 1 and Season 2 up until the episode Washington Wonderland. Since then, Season 2 has concluded, Season 3 has began and concluded, and an entire spin-off series known as the Nixonverse has began and concluded as well, which we will talk about the Nixonverse when we get to it. So depending on what you consider the Nixonverse, in my first video, I covered either just under half or just over half of the entire series. So for those who may be new or just because it's been a while, let's do a summary of everything I talked about in that first video. And even if you've seen the first video or watched it right before watching this one, I still urge you to stick around for the summary because there's some things that need emphasized now that I didn't know to emphasize then. As I mentioned in the intro, most of the monument mythos concerns monsters within national monuments. The first of these is a video called Liberty Lurker, which shows that underneath the Statue of Liberty, the United States government has been feeding people to some kind of behemoth. We then see that on Mount Rushmore, these giant spikes appear out of the faces of the presidents. We'll later find out that these spikes are something known as special trees. These special trees occur right after graffiti shows up, urging citizens that the United States government is killing people within national monuments. After that, we see that the island of Alcatraz is actually a giant flesh creature that This is really weird if this is your first time hearing any of it, but mind you, the first time I talked about it, it took 3 hours, so I'm doing my best. The island of Alcatraz is a giant creature that kills and replicates any biological matter it comes across. At the end of the video, we see that Alcatraz has made it to the mainland, and by the year 2020, the Alcatraz zone has infected everything to West Texas. Now, in the first video, I didn't really emphasize how big of a deal this was, mostly because I really didn't understand the gravity of what was being implied. But it turns out that this Alcatraz zone is a giant flesh conglomerate that, as Alex said in one of his interviews, looks like The Thing from the movie The Thing, you know, the giant amalgamation of human and animal body parts. And yeah, that's just what all the land looks like from California to Texas, so not good. Now, national monuments aren't the only thing changed in United States history within the monument mythos. Some things change, such as the presidency. Because in 1968, we see that James Dean is elected president instead of the historical counterpart of Richard Nixon. I'll have a lot to say about James Dean in a little bit, but this establishes our two main timelines. There is one world known as the Deanverse, which is the universe we follow throughout the story, and there's another world known as the Nixonverse. The Nixonverse being more similar or perhaps even the same as our world, given that events within this Deanverse share similarities to ours, but with major differences, like President Dean being elected. There's other reasons that I consider the Nixonverse to be our universe, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. But that's not to say that the Nixonverse we see later in the monument mythos is our universe. I mean, by drastic measures. But I'll talk about why all that is when we get to it. Just understand for now that there's two timelines. One can be imagined as ours, and the other is the one that these events are taking place in. It's also worth mentioning that at this time, many people believe James Dean to be the devil. We see that in 2003, a being known as the Angel steals Air Force One and visits various monuments. We'll later find out that it's the Angel who is graffitiing monuments such as Rushmore mentioned earlier. After that, we're told that people are restrained within the Lincoln Memorial statue, and a government agent named Leonard Moreland tells us that this position is known as a Lincoln Looker, and is decided by the United States President. This position was kept in secret for years until accounts such as that of Howard Melrose broke the story open. After this, we're told that within the DC monument grows one of these special trees, the same thing that was seen growing out of the president's heads at Mount Rushmore, and that during and after its construction, people were fed to this special tree. Now, we don't know what that means yet, but we will soon. In the modern age, 20 missing people, known as the Washington absentees, went missing at the DC monument. We're shown a diagram that tells us people are taken into the monument, elevated into the air where music causes them to fall asleep before they fall down to the earth, and whatever this feeding process is takes place. We see more graffiti from the Air Force One Angel before it seems the DC monument bends over on itself and a large explosion takes place. This causes the 19 Washington absentees to be spit out. We'll learn more about the 20th Washington absentee later. A news source known as the New Delaware Journal tells us that George Washington was found alive, frozen within the ice of the Delaware River. It's funny because in my original video, I made a lot of jokes about how this doesn't mean anything, and it's just kind of a sight gag that Washington's still alive. I will be proven wrong about that in just a minute. One of our first big story beats come with the story of the Rockefeller tree tragedy. In 1934, John D. Rockefeller, who in our universe was the oil tycoon, but in the Dean-verse was the President of the United States. So, this former President Rockefeller searches for a Christmas tree to be placed in the Rockefeller Plaza. And of course, he ignores all signs of danger and decides to pick a special tree. Now, special trees have come up a few times by now. Effectively, they're a kind of cosmic power that will make more sense as we talk about the different dimensions and monsters within the mythos itself. But all you need to know for now is that these special trees are a very important item in the cosmic balance of the universe and should not be messed with. So, Rockefeller messes with it and eventually uses explosives and grave diggers to dig the tree out over the course of 3 years. In 1934, he places the tree in the Rockefeller Plaza, and a young girl named Virginia Arnoldson goes with her friends to put an ornament on top of the tree. This causes the tree to bend over and create a burst of energy, much like we saw at the DC monument. Virginia goes to a field of special trees in a location known as Wonderland. Wonderland will come up again shortly, but for now, when she comes out of Wonderland, everything is a little bit different. Her friends and family have changed, and it seems like she is now in the incorrect universe. Closer to the modern age, we see that a girl named Lauren Arnoldson is on a vacation to the Grand Canyon with her brother and father. We'll later see that her brother goes by the moniker of Dr. Disturbing on the internet, and her father is named Nathaniel Arnoldson. By connections that still aren't entirely known, this family is related to Virginia Arnoldson, the young girl who experienced the Rockefeller tragedy at the plaza and teleported to Wonderland in 1934. In Lauren's video, we see these giant floating creatures known as canyon crowns. Lauren remarks that the giant floating crown she sees is probably her Aunt Maya. Maya had been missing for some time, and Nathaniel had brought his kids out to the Grand Canyon in order to find her. I'm sure this seems all over the place, and there's a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense, but I'm just laying out the pieces for now. We're then shown the story of Thomas Crawford, the artist who created the Statue of Freedom, a real statue that sits over the Capitol Dome to this day. However, in this account, which is shared between Thomas and his daughter Nina, we're shown that Thomas became obsessed with the statue, eventually cutting off pieces of himself and inserting them inside of the statue itself. Nina, Thomas's daughter, begins to miss her father and feels his energy connected to the Freedom statue. So the little girl hides inside of the box that is shipping freedom to the United States, but after the statue breaks out and takes the young girl with her, it seems from the police report that Nina was also murdered and pieces of her shoved inside and on the outside of the Freedom statue itself. Effectively, both the creator of the statue and his daughter were murdered by this sculpture, and as we'll later see, their souls still exist within the Freedom statue. In the modern age, a group known as the ADA, or the Anti-Dean Association, this is a group who despise President Dean and oppose all modern government action. or at least all that we've been shown throughout the story. In the midst of a protest, the ADA try to destroy the Freedom statue and knock it off of the Capitol dome. This causes Freedom to shoot to life and slaughter dozens of people at the Capitol riot, and simultaneously creating one of the most terrifying images of the entire story, because a giant 20-foot woman chasing you down with a sword, not fun. And that's the end of Season 1. Season 1 mostly just placed these pieces of the world out on the table with not a lot of cooperation between them. But Season 2 starts to tie the strings together. At the beginning of Season 2, a company known as Maze makes massive leaps in technology, creating at-home computers as early as 1960. That is, until it seems use of modern digital technology causes these massive creatures to begin attacking the United States. As you can imagine, all digital technology is then ordered to be destroyed or turned in. These attacks that occur on companies like Maze, particularly around 1980, seem to come after something known as Project Horned Serpent in 1972, when the government begins to try to destroy true forces of mass destruction, or in other words, things like special trees. And shortly after that, in combination with humanity's use of technology, these massive behemoths begin to attack the United States. Now you might be wondering, are these giant things that shoot up out of the ground and destroy entire cities related at all to things like the Liberty Lurker? And the answer is yes, and I'll explain why in a minute. We then see a video from Maya Arnoldson. If you'll remember, Maya is the sister of Nathaniel Arnoldson, the man who took his 2 kids to the Grand Canyon. We see that Maya was breaking into Maze facilities. We see graffiti from the Air Force One Angel that says all the monuments are connected. Something that didn't mean a lot then, but certainly does now. As she explores the underground caverns of the Maze facility, energy and electricity begin to shoot from the walls. Maya warns this that sites like these have not been fed in some time. Now we start to see some connections. We know that there was some kind of giant creature underneath the Statue of Liberty that was being fed a steady supply of people. And now, when Maya goes to visit the underground caverns of a Maze facility, lightning shoots out from the walls as she says they haven't been fed. After this are news reports of a ship stuck within the Suez Canal. Just as in real life, this ship is known as the Ever Given, but unlike in real life, there's a giant crab monster underneath it that whenever the governments try to move the ship using a nuke, for some reason, the crab stands up and just walks the ship into the desert. Eventually, the ship crashes into a building, and a bunch of people show up to steal stuff from the wreckage of the ship itself, but then this giant panic starts, and a bunch of people die. This leads survivors of the event to create a religion known as the Church of the Ever Given. And Howard Melrose, the same person who broke the story about the Lincoln Looker, reports on the event and says that it was disgusting and appeared that everyone became one, referring to the giant flesh mass of death that they made. We're then given another look back at the presidency of James Dean, this time a tragedy that took place shortly after he took office, when sirens around the United States are hijacked and cause several people to die and others to experience permanent hearing loss. The ADA are accused of this terrorist attack, and then members of the ADA are taken to national monuments for, quote, rehabilitation. Of course, as we know, these giant monsters that need fed lie within these monuments, so it seems that Dean was using this moment to feed these creatures. Families of those who were taken to monuments say that they come back an entirely new and better person. This is in reference to the fact that after being fed or given to these special trees, people swap over into another reality, with their other iteration of them changing places, similar to what happened to Virginia at the Rockefeller Plaza. Also, the majority of the United States needs hearing implants after this event, and the Dean presidency effectively cures deafness, supposedly. After this, we're shown a video of the Starry Sphinx. This video tells us that the Sphinx is a creature from or that travels to the planet Mars, and that underneath the pyramids of Giza are these massive towers that each contain special trees. We're told that ancient warriors would be given a concoction of drugs and hew at the special trees all day and night to prevent them from growing any further. We see these bright lights appear on the ground that create a giant lightning strike. In future videos, we're told that this lightning strike creates a material known as Giza glass. Giza glass is a special material that when it's made into weaponry such as blades, has a supernatural property. This property is, anyone who is cut with Giza glass is not cut in the way they would be with a traditional weapon. Instead, that piece of their body simply takes up another place in reality. For example, if someone was to take a Giza glass sword and cut off your hand, you would still be able to control and feel your hand, it just would no longer be attached to your arm. That's because Giza glass doesn't separate matter from matter like metal does. Instead, it separates one place in reality from another. This was discovered when the original finder of Giza glass, a man named Petrie, fell and cut his head off on a piece of Giza glass. But of course, due to the glass's property, his head was still alive. This has been described by Alex as making pieces of your body wireless. So in other words, that piece of your body still works, it's just no longer in the same geometric position. Now, when someone's head is cut off by Giza glass, that creates complications. Because, the cosmic forces of the universe don't like a head that controls a body, or a body that controls a head, or whichever way you want to look at it. So the head begins to discolor and swell to gigantic proportions, and effectively act as its own force separate from the body. In other words, getting your head cut off by Giza glass allows your head to cheat physics, and it can grow to whatever size or float in whatever direction you choose. Eventually, several blades are fashioned out of Giza glass and given to statues that are alive, which I'll get to eventually. And these living statues that are wielding these Giza glass blades are placed within the Grand Canyon in order to protect government secrets. Now, for one, this is all hidden from public knowledge, but two, probably starts to put some pieces together. Why in Lauren Arnoldson's Grand Canyon trip do you see a giant floating thing moving through the Grand Canyon? Because within the Grand Canyon, these living statues with the Giza glass swords are placed, and whenever they cut off someone's head, their head becomes a, essentially, giant floating airship. It also makes sense as to why, after the Freedom statue was shot down in the ADA riot, and slaughtered everyone on the ground by decapitating them with swords, the statue was then moved to the Grand Canyon. Howard Melrose, the reporter mentioned a couple times at this point, leaked government files detailing the victims of this Giza Guardian program, with one of the victims of the Guardian program being Maya Arnoldson, the aunt of Lauren Arnoldson. We're then told at some point Nathaniel Arnoldson is killed, and from the video that Lauren takes, it seems that he was also killed by a Giza Guardian, and his head, now a Canyon crown, has followed her back home. We then jump back to the 1940s, where we read another writing from this universe's President Rockefeller. Rockefeller reveals that back before World War I, he sold Canyon crowns to Germany. If you'll recall, these crowns have the ability to float through space on their own volition. So, Germany begins to use them as a sort of fuel for airships. Eventually, when the World War begins, Germany uses these airships on Allied forces. This information is kept secret from the general public, but weapons are developed by the government to destroy these German airships. This weapon used to destroy the airships is a sort of death ray that uses a special lens that is secret to us, at least for now. When this death ray is deployed, it works in destroying the airships. However, the energy let out by the death ray destroys the 17 men who were on the ground operating it. However, because we're dealing with weird cosmic energy and multi-dimensional travel, of course these 17 men just don't die. Instead, their body parts are atomized and fused together into one hyper-reality creature. This creature, which is now 17 people operating as one, travels back to the United States and kills former President Rockefeller as they blame him for their creation. It does this by melting the door off of Rockefeller's bunker and effectively vaporizing him. In the final bit of information that I covered in the previous video, we are given the conclusion to Virginia Arnoldson's story. If you'll remember, that is the young girl who switched realities at the original Rockefeller Tree tragedy. Virginia elaborates on her time in Wonderland, and says that while in her original accounting she implied that her time in Wonderland was a few brief moments, here she tells us that it felt more like years and years. This field of trees was very loud, with people teleporting from one location to the other in these blinding flashes of light. She was a young girl, afraid and alone, before a man named Everett approached her and said that he would take care of her. Virginia notes that whenever she looks up or down, it seems as if the trees extend continuously in both directions, implying that the plane of reality she is on now is practically infinite, with one universe and its counterpart constantly reflected one over the other. Eventually, after years of torment, Virginia is placed back into reality. However, as mentioned in her original account, everything seemed different, and it seemed that now she was in the wrong universe. Determined to get back to the universe she was born in, Virginia seeks out guidance. She's called back to the Rockefeller Plaza, where a giant woman who appears to be a living tree tells her that she must come back in several years, and that when she does come back, she must exchange a life for her own. During this time of waiting, Virginia falls in love with Leonard Moreland, the government agent who gives an account on both the Starry Sphinx and the Lincoln Looker. The two fall in love, and Virginia becomes pregnant with their child, who she decides to name Everett. After her time of waiting is up, Virginia travels to the DC Monument, and once she's there, she undergoes the protocol that we saw all the way back in our original description of how the DC Monument is fed. However, after what seems like hundreds of years, Virginia comes out of this comatose state on the ground, only to realize that she's no longer pregnant. It seems that somewhere in her transition through Wonderland and back to this universe, the life of her unborn child was given in exchange for hers. Brokenhearted, Virginia and the other Washington absentees are eventually released in the 2003 incident that we saw in the original DC Monument video. Virginia remarks that she's sorry to everyone who she hurt, and we're shown a painting that Virginia made of all of her friends who were subjected to this harsh reality when they went to the Rockefeller Plaza in 1934. And after being shown this cheery image of what life could have been like for young Virginia, we're given the message that the 20th Washington absentee is believed to be her unborn son, Everett. And that is as far as I got in my original video. Now, I'm sure a lot of that seemed confusing, and you probably have a lot of questions, and I assure you that at least one or two of them might be answered. So now that we've covered all the old material, let's get into the new stuff. Beginning with the first episode of Season 2 that I have yet to cover, Air Force One Angel. Air Force One Angel picks up in the aftermath of the original Air Force One hijacking that we saw all the way back at the beginning of Season 1. If you'll remember, some kind of creature took over Air Force One and drove it from monument to monument, graffitiing various warnings. We see a maze simulation of the plane strike, meaning that eventually the government shot Air Force One down. After this, we see a map of the United States that shows it has been divided into 3 different zones. These zones are the Alcatraz Zone, the Rushmore Zone, and the Washington Zone. And also, while I'm here, I want to give a huge thank you to Matthew Schroeder. You can find him on Twitter at JoblessMatthew, because Matthew has been a longtime member of the Monument Mythos community and was a part of the Discord server back when Alex did his Q&As. So Matthew transcribed a lot of Alex's answers and passed those on to me, which I greatly appreciate. I mention that now because a lot of the clarification as to what these events mean came from Alex's answers to those Q&As. Among them were his clarifications about these 3 zones. As we discussed earlier, the Alcatraz Zone is effectively a giant field of rotten flesh, whereas the Rushmore Zone and the Washington Zone are nearly entirely overrun with special trees. This makes sense because over a lot of the previous videos we've seen, they began to pop up more and more, almost as if they're beginning to infest everything they inhabit. While in the Rushmore Zone, they seem to be more spread out as the population is more sparse out there. In the Washington Zone, they're much more clustered. And again, these things will randomly light off with electricity and teleport you out of existence. So the country's not doing great. The capital of each of these zones, Alcatraz, Rushmore, and Washington, D.C., have been renamed to their original Native American titles. The map is then labeled Extribus Unum, which means out of 3, 1. This is a play on the American motto of E pluribus unum, which means out of many one, and symbolizes that now, what little is left of the United States is made up of these 3 zones. We're then shown a video of what appears to be a giant egg floating in space as we get a message from the ADA. The message says, Al Gore's America is a shell for the true ruler beneath our feet. It is time for the underground god to leave. He does not belong here. But the world egg cannot hatch without force. We must fracture the zones ourselves. We must split the earth open. Once it leaves, there will be peace and a state for each and every person. No more zones, for the cracks will be the true borders. 1,000 states of America are 1,000 states of peace. We are no longer the Anti-Device Association. We are the advocates for the division of America. How will we divide the land? With our fallen angel, of course. Who would have thought that he would land on the tomb of the unknown soldier? We found him before anyone else, burnt and broken from the blast. After we fix him, he will be a walking atom bomb. He will evict the horned serpent the same way he evicted the traitor, President Rockefeller, from reality. We're then shown the ADA's new logo of a serpent wrapped around an egg. So there's a lot to break down with this. The first thing that we see is we have another switch in the presidency. Given that this is 2003, the same time as the DC Monument disaster, rather than George W. Bush being president, it is now Al Gore. However, that is the least of our worries because the very next thing the ADA says is that the true God lies beneath their feet, and that it is time for that God to leave. This starts to put together a lot of the picture. We've seen before that there's these underground caverns beneath May's facilities, and that whenever people used electronics, these giant worm things attacked. That in combination with things like the Liberty Lurker and the special trees themselves implies that there is some kind of entity living underground. And according to the ADA, the only way to get this entity out is by fracturing the earth, and that they will fracture the earth with the fallen angel. This fallen angel being the same entity that took over the Air Force One plane. The ADA refers to this giant monster underground as the Horned Serpent. This makes sense again because all the way back in May's Movie Maker, we saw that the government's program to destroy special trees, or true forces of mass destruction, was a project known as Project Horned Serpent. So it seems that, at least at a government level, this thing under America has been called the Horned Serpent for quite some time. And then the ADA says that the angel will evict the Horned Serpent the same way it evicted President Rockefeller. And here we have my first prediction from the first video being made true. I'll brag on myself a little bit. I got a lot of stuff right from the first video. I also got some things wrong, but let's just focus on the things I was right about. Like my prediction that the Air Force One angel and the Avogadro are one and the same. The 17 men who were destroyed by the Rockefeller death ray and atomized and turned into this one being made out of energy, and then use that energy to kill President Rockefeller, is the same entity that stole Air Force One and left graffiti all around national monuments. I speculated on this because, again, they're both supernatural beings of energy that have problems with the government, and in both the instance of President Rockefeller and Air Force One, it's mentioned that extreme heat was used to break into what they were trying to get into. And here we have confirmation that the angel and the Avogadro are the same being. And as much as I would like to refer to the entity as the Avogadro, because I think it's funny and I like Call of Duty Zombies, I'm going to refer to it as the angel from here on out because that's how the story refers to it, and it'll just make everything easier. Text then tells us that the unification of 1980 was short-lived, but after the unification of 2003, it is not assumed that state borders will return within the century. Alex has clarified that the unification refers to the trees shooting up out of the ground and making problems for everyone. The one in 1980 was the one we saw where these special trees or pieces of the horned serpent, whatever that is, attacked maize. Those were more localized events, but as we've discussed in 2003, there's no going back for the country for at least 100 years. The ADA hates these 3 zones because, again, they're trying to fracture the earth. And at the end of the episode, we see that the angel has fallen at the tomb of the unknown soldier. This is kind of heartfelt, given that the angel itself is an entity made up of 17 unrecognizable soldiers, who were all killed as a part of a government project that they had no control in. And now, after being shot down by the government because they stole Air Force One, the angel lands at the tomb of the unknown soldier as some kind of solace for their identities that they'll never recover. And with that, we move into the next episode of the series, Liberty Lurkers. This one's got a lot, so bear with me. We open with a shot of the Statue of Progress that lies at the front of the Suez Canal. Both the Statue of Progress and the Statue of Liberty were made by the same designer, Frederick Bartholdi. Now, this is true in real life. Frederick designed both statues. But if you remember how the Statue of Liberty exists in the Monument Mythos, it's probably not a good thing that he also made the Statue of Progress. We then hear part of Ferdinand de Lesseps' speech that he gave whenever the Suez Canal was opened, or at least the version that he gave in our reality. Here, he stops at the end of the reading of the speech and says that he couldn't bring himself to tell everyone that because he knows the real reason the Suez Canal was made. He says that the man beneath America made him build the canal, and that at any night, the man beneath America can seep into his dreams and have Ferdinand do his bidding. So this makes sense. We know that the Statue of Liberty was built to contain whatever the Liberty Lurker is, some kind of giant monster. So it makes sense that the same designer had a similar purpose with the Statue of Progress. However, the creator of the Suez Canal, for the first time in the series, refers to this giant entity under the earth, the horned serpent as we've learned it's called. He refers to it as a man. And if you're wondering who that man might be, we're going to get an answer to that right now. We see an ADA animation called The Sinking Man and the Forbidden Fruit. And here we see a silhouette of George Washington, again, many consider the founder of the United States, very prominent figure in American history, and as most of us know, he is in the process of cutting down a cherry tree. There's an old fable that is real or fake, depending on which historian you ask, that says when George Washington was a young boy, he cut down his father's cherry tree. And when George Washington's father came and asked him, "Did you cut down my cherry tree?" George Washington is honest and tells his father that he did. Now, this story has mostly been used in schoolhouses at a young age to teach children the importance of honesty and the valor of American founders. So to those of you outside of America, just know that the story of Washington and the cherry tree is a well-known tale, which is why Alex uses it to do what he's about to do now. We see in the animation, just like in the story, Washington goes to cut down the cherry tree. However, rather than cutting it down, Washington begins to sink below the earth. As we know, trees are a very big deal within the Monument Mythos, special trees specifically. So if Washington tried to cut down a special tree, then the same thing happened to him that happened to everyone else. Mess with the special tree, end up in Wonderland. However, it doesn't stop there. After Washington gets to Wonderland, we see that instead of teleporting from one layer to the other, he is stretched and his figure is pulled across the several layers time and time again, eventually turning the remnants of Washington into a giant abomination. Before we can ask ourselves what this means, we cut back to the fire burning on top the Statue of Progress. So we have the horned serpent being referred to as a man, and we have a story of how George Washington was pulled to Wonderland and stretched to behemoth proportions. We then get another interview from Bartholdi, again the creator of the Statue of Liberty and the Statue of Progress. We hear repeated the interview Bartholdi gave at the very beginning of the entire series, all the way back in Liberty Lurker. Only this time, the interview continues on. Bartholdi says he knows why the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty was raised to such gigantic proportions. Bartholdi knew that he was building a slaughterhouse for America's founder. The founding father, who Bartholdi was assured at one point was a normal person like you or I, but has grown into this abomination, the horned serpent. And then we get a shot that picks up again from the first episode in the series, Liberty Lurker. Whenever we see something begin to rise out of the statue, we now see what that something is. And this giant behemoth, the horned serpent, is the amalgamation of George Washington. So, as insane as that is, it does connect some dots. All the way back in Delaware Double, we saw that for some reason, Washington was just frozen in the ice. And I made a bunch of jokes in the previous video how that doesn't really mean anything, but it means something now. As we know, every person has their counterpart. Virginia had her counterpart, Rockefeller had his counterpart. One version of every person exists in each reality. So likely the reason one version of Washington just wound up frozen in a river is because the other one got stuck in Wonderland and became this monster. A monster that is so large that the ADA says it needs to hatch from its world egg, and as you might have put together at this point, is the connecting through line of every monument tragedy in the world. The horned serpent is so big that the monster underneath the Statue of Progress and the monster underneath the Statue of Liberty is the same thing, with these feeding grounds placed around the United States just being appendages of it. So George Washington is the monster of the entire series. We'll talk about the implications of that in a minute, but we still have the rest of the episode to get through. We're told that in 1985, Cathonauts survey underneath the Statue of Liberty's pedestal. Cathonaut, by the way, is a really cool word. So you've probably heard of things like Cthulhu or whatnot. Well, that prefix of the CTH comes from the Greeks and is used to mean underworld or the deep sea or effectively the void, the unexplored, right? And then the word naut used for explorer like argonaut or astronaut or cosmonaut. So put the two together and you have Cathonaut, which is an explorer or voyager of the void or the unseen, which is really cool. I like that word. So in 1985, we're told that Cathonauts went into the pedestal into something known as the horned serpent metastructure. This is the tunnels that were created by the horned serpent's form. And when we witness the inside of this metastructure, we see that it is Wonderland, a world full of special trees, noise, energy, and confusion. The same world that Virginia and her friends were stuck in for years on end. Poor Virginia. And again, this fills in some more holes. The horned serpent is a creature that was stretched across reality and has now become this giant beast underneath the earth. So in the tunnels that the horned serpent traveled within the earth lies the passage to Wonderland. Effectively, the horned serpent acting as this bridge, even by incident, between the two realities. For one, that means humanity now has access to Wonderland without getting trapped in the whole nebulous, tree epidemic thing. And seemingly after this, that piece of the horned serpent travels back into the earth. So that thing, which is George Washington, keep in mind, is just there now, whatever that means. And while that's probably confusing and there's a lot going on, don't worry because it's all going to go away in just a moment, because we have the last episode of season 2, Alcatraz Apocalypse. We have our historical quote about the Tree of Liberty needing blood, which is ironic at this point in the series. And we're then shown the final upload of Dr. Disturbing. Dr. Disturbing being the investigator, or effectively the YouTuber from earlier in the series, who covered a lot of mazes and the government's actions. He then shows his dad's favorite things, which includes things like the Apotheosis of Washington, a famous painting that portrays Washington as a sort of entity, again ironic at this point in the series, a painting made by James Dean. Now this one's interesting because this was a real painting that James Dean made. Like in our reality, James Dean painted for a while and this was one of his artworks. As you can probably tell, the image looks uncannily similar to Special Trees, which apparently was just a happy accident, according to Alex, but kind of creepy nonetheless. And then finally, Virginia Arnoldson's painting of her and her friends together at last. Dr. Disturbing then says it's in memory of his father, Nathaniel Arnoldson, and this confirms another one of my theories from the previous video, that Dr. Disturbing was the, at the time, unnamed brother of Lauren Arnoldson, meaning that Virginia, Maya, Nathaniel, Lauren, and now Dr. Disturbing are all a part of the Arnoldson family. And right before I can celebrate my success, they all die. It says that the remains of Lauren and Quinn Arnoldson, Quinn being the true name of Dr. Disturbing, were found in the Grand Canyon. Reports say that the two were riding on very large balloons. Of course, we know in reality that these balloons are canyon crowns, and it only makes sense that they're the canyon crowns of Maya and Nathaniel, after which Lauren and Quinn supposedly fell to their death. Well, that's just depressing. The remnants of Virginia's family, the older generation gets their head cut off and becomes these giant crowns, and then as crowns they try to lead their kids into the Grand Canyon, and then the kids fall to their death. But as with everything else in the Monument Mythos, no time to worry about that because we're moving at breakneck speed into another tragedy. We're treated to the last broadcast of the New Delaware Journal and then shown the final words of Leonard Moreland. However, he's also the figure who fell in love with Virginia Arnoldson and the father of Everett Arnoldson, the child who was lost in Wonderland. Or at least lost whenever Virginia did her transition through Wonderland. Leonard says that he was captured by the Anti-Dean Association, and that while captured by the ADA, he was forced to read their scripts to lend credibility to whatever their propaganda said. That means that Leonard Moreland's testimonies in both the Lincoln Looker and the Starry Sphinx are untrue. Furthermore, that anything the ADA has said throughout the entire series is called into question. Now, I don't have time to go through everything in the series that might be a lie now. I say that like I don't regularly upload 3 or 5 hour videos, but I don't want to do that right now. But in a moment, we'll talk about what my 2 main takeaways from that revelation are. All we need to know for now is that Leonard Moreland's testimonies in those videos were false, and that in reality, Leonard Moreland created the New Delaware Journal as a way to get the truth out. As a matter of fact, he claims that the New Delaware Journal was an operation entirely ran by himself. Now, I personally don't think this is true. I think that Leonard is just saying this to cover for anyone else who was assisting him. This also lends credibility to the idea that Leonard Moreland is a good guy, because a lot of people theorize that maybe he was just using Virginia as some means to let the government have control over Wonderland or something like that. But considering everything that he said about Lincoln Lookers and whatnot, he was forced to say, and the only things he did on his own volition were fall in love with Virginia and get the truth out through the New Delaware Journal, I think he's an alright guy. However, that doesn't matter because the reason he is making this broadcast is because it's his last will and testimony. Back in season 1, I thought one of the most obscure and underutilized assets of the series was Alcatraz Island. Remember how Alcatraz is described as just this giant island that is a cell that, can absorb things and then try to replicate it, and it made its way to the mainland and destroyed like half of the United States, and then we never heard about it again? Well, that's because it was being saved for this moment. According to Moreland, the Alcatraz zone did not get all the way to Texas and then simply just quit. Instead, it was waiting. As this giant mass of biological material, it realized it couldn't keep absorbing flesh and then just recreating it in these blobs of biomatter. Instead, it was learning how to more perfectly replicate life. And according to Moreland, at some time late in the night, Alcatraz, in a fraction of a second, took everything. It completely absorbed every person and every living thing across the country in a fraction of a second, and just as quickly replaced it with a replicant. Moreland says that even his brain is an amalgamation of what Alcatraz thinks his brain is shaped like. In his own words, America has become the ship of Theseus. He ends the broadcast by saying he will not live as this thing's copy and has decided that the only way he can be sure his form is destroyed is with self-immolation. Before burning himself to death, he asks the listener to push on and try to fight in whatever way they can for Everett, for Virginia, and for America. We then get a message that will be very important for Season 3. It says Cathonaut A will transfer data in a theatrical manner after the apocalypse. The dates will be February the 22nd of 2022 in theirs, and October the 1st of 2016 in yours. Okay, so at this point, all the characters that we care about, like the Arnoldsons, Leonard Moreland, all them, they're dead. And now every single other person has been turned into a flesh copy of themselves from Alcatraz biomatter. So it really sounds like the whole world's ending, and you're onto something. We see more graffiti from the Angel. Remember, the Angel and the Avogadro are one and the same. The graffiti says that the ADA members are deranged and have now been turned to ash. Effectively, the Angel just wants to be left alone. Also, it was confirmed by Alex that while Alcatraz replicated all living things in the country, it didn't replicate these supernatural beings like Freedom or the Angel. And while every member of the government and the entire country is now a clone of their former self, the clones do not know that they are clones and are acting as they normally would. So the government can't allow the Angel to just go do his own thing, and they eventually track him down to the Babylon forest. To destroy Angel, the government recruits their best soldier in Operation Thunderbird. Their best soldier, of course, being the Statue of Freedom. Androids are used to lure Freedom to captive special trees, and whenever the special trees react around Freedom, it freezes Freedom in a chrysalis of Giza glass. Freedom's then picked up and dropped off in the middle of the Babylon forest, with the intention that Freedom will find Angel and destroy it forever. However, that is not at all what happens. If you'll remember, the ADA said that they were going to use the Angel to fracture the Earth. And the Angel is a being of immense supernatural power, but Freedom is also a being of immense supernatural power, especially its Giza Glass sword. Giza Glass has a lot of connections to Wonderland and hyper-reality stuff, so whenever Angel and Freedom confront each other and Angel hits the Giza Glass sword with its power, well, we're then shown a sort of satellite camera from off the Earth that shows exactly what that does. And what it does is destroy the entire planet. So now the whole Earth's destroyed because the Angel and Freedom fought each other. So that's the end, right? Well, remember how the ADA wanted this to happen to free the Horned Serpent? Well, now that the Earth's destroyed, we see exactly what that Horned Serpent looks like. An impossible being of gigantic proportions. Incomprehensibly large when compared to the Earth itself. But if you'll remember, the Horned Serpent is the bridge between our world and Wonderland. So as these two pieces of reality fall apart into each other, the world and reality itself falls into these pulsating balls of special trees. This new hyper-reality being a fusion between a destroyed world and Wonderland, meaning that now this entire reality, the Deanverse, exists solely as destroyed rubble between realms. And we get the final message of Season 2 that says survivors of the Great Division, as it's called, are known as Cornerfolk. And the end credits play out to a rendition of Miley Cyrus's Party in the USA. Fantastic. And with that, we have the end of Season 2. Literally everything died and nothing exists anymore. And that means all of my timelines, all of my speculations, all of the character boards I'd written up from the first video, you can just take all of those and throw them in a dumpster like I did because they mean nothing anymore. Everyone that we ever cared about is dead, go home. Since the Deanverse is effectively dead, I guess I'll clear up my last little idea about it now. Because it doesn't matter anymore. So when Leonard Moreland said that everything he said in The Lincoln Looker and Starry Sphinx was fake, that calls a lot of things into question. He said in Lincoln Looker that the purpose of a Lincoln Looker was just as a way to punish someone the president didn't like, which is kind of ridiculous, even for the Monument Mythos verse. I think what the Lincoln Looker is a sort of watchman position that is, sure, given to someone the government doesn't like, but I think it's a way to contain the DC monument. If you look at the way the Lincoln Memorial statue is set up, it is facing directly at the DC monument. So perhaps there's something about the special tree within the DC monument that if it's under observation, it is less likely to act out. Of course, that didn't work given the 2003 incident, but maybe the government would put someone in that chair facing down the monument, even if the person was never aware of it, as a means of containing the DC monument special tree. Perhaps the one person breaking out of it in Howard Melrose's account and the position being unguarded for some time might have led to the eventual DC monument disaster. The other thing is Starry Sphinx. So we know now that the stuff Moreland said in that video about the government classifying humanity as a force of mass destruction, of the original Giza warriors given a drug to hack away at the special trees to keep them from growing. We know that all that's false now. And also, Alex confirmed in his Q&A that the rover footage we see of like the Sphinx moving across Mars, that's all fake as well. So really the only thing we got concrete out of Starry Sphinx is the fact that these stars, effectively, or the constellation as it's called, forms, and the lightning strike they create creates Giza glass. So we can take all the stuff about the soldiers hacking away at trees, or humanity being a force of mass destruction, we can throw all that out. But of course, we can pretty much throw all of it out because the world's dead now. Who cares? But if you look down at the timestamp, you can see that we are nowhere near done. And there's a couple reasons for that I'll get into now. So if you're a nerd like I am, and you watched all of Alex's channel Again, the channel's now called Mr. Manticore. It used to be called Alex Kansas. But if you've watched all of the Mr. Manticore videos, then the final message at the end of Alcatraz Apocalypse would have raised an eyebrow. The phrase that said, "Survivors of the Great Division are known as corner folk." This is a cool moment if you were keeping up with the series when this happened, because corner folk was the name of a series Alex made back before even the Monument Mythos. And recently, as Alex has restructured the seasons on his channel, the 2 corner folk episodes that are still up have been added to season 1 and season 2. So this last sentence tied in the lore of corner folk into the Monument Mythos. I highly suggest you go check out corner folk for yourself. It's a cool little online horror project on its own. It's a short video. But a short summary of the first corner folk video is that in 2011, a man named Riley Tillon made 3 videos explaining something he described as corner folk, effectively a trans-dimensional species that can jump from different planes of reality. These beings that can traverse dimensions do it by getting to corners or borders between different realities and then jumping from one reality to the other. Riley becomes obsessed with these corner folk and even captures one on camera. They only exist in our reality when they make their jumps and spend the rest of their time in whatever these other planes of existence might be. He theorizes that the corner folk must come from a sort of corner world, or a world that is entirely made up of intersections. In other words, if these beings' natural state is to jump from one reality to the other, and if they can only rest in the corners of reality, then their home world must be entirely made up of these reality corners. Riley becomes so obsessed with this notion that he eventually jumps into the corner world himself. And when we see what the corner world looks like, again, this was back before the Monument Mythos even began, it looks a lot like how the Deanverse looked at the end of season 2. Riley Tillon comes out alive, but his organs have all been folded in on themselves. And the corner folk video leaves us with this notion that there is a world that exists to house beings that jump between other worlds. So it seems that the corner world is the aftermath of what we saw in Alcatraz Apocalypse. If there are all these other intersecting realities, then the destruction of the Deanverse that was caused by the Horned Serpent being released whenever Angel and Freedom fought, collapsed all the realities in on where the Deanverse was located. So whatever survivors existed or crawled out of Wonderland into that reality became the corner folk, and the Deanverse became the corner world, effectively working as an intersection between different planes of existence. There's one more video in the corner folk lore called Corner Girl, and while we don't really have a lot of elaboration on it yet, we have someone who tells us that they are not Alex Kansas, which again is the person documenting this entire channel. But whoever they are, they say that they are the inspiration for Riley Tillon, or the guy who jumped into the corner world, and he says that he moves luggage, clarifying that people are luggage. And while holding on to one of his victims, or aka luggage, he jumps into the corner world, supposedly feeding people to whatever this entity is. Now this kind of makes sense. We saw back in the Monument Mythos that the Horned Serpent, or perhaps even parts of Wonderland, needed fed a steady supply of blood and bodies. And now we see that in the aftermath of that, someone from supposedly our reality or another reality is continuing to feed people to the corner world, even if it's just one at a time. There hasn't been any updates on that series yet, so I'm not sure where it's going, but that's where it stands at the moment. So anyway, whole timeline of the Monument Mythos destroyed, and what was left of it effectively became a traffic light that other reality jumpers simply pass through as they go from one reality to the other. So is that it? Is our entire world destroyed? Did none of my stories or none of my theories from the first video mean anything? For one, yes. But two, our story doesn't stop there. And the first reason it doesn't stop there is because of a little thing called the Nixonverse. If you'll remember, it has always been the main concept through the Monument Mythos, or at least as we learned of Wonderland and different dimensions, that there is one reality and then its mirror. And as far as we know, there are only 2 realities that exist throughout time. Again, the community has labeled these the Deanverse and the Nixonverse. Our entire story of the Monument Mythos has taken place in the Deanverse, and now that's entirely destroyed. So we've still got the Nixonverse. And you may ask yourself, okay, well, if the Nixonverse is just our reality, as it's heavily implied to be throughout a lot of the series, with the things like, theoretically President Nixon was president, John D. Rockefeller was an oil tycoon. Everything we hear about this Nixonverse that we haven't seen implies that it's just our existence. And that might have been true before this universe blew up and likely greatly affected the still existing one. Let me explain what I mean. So we know that there are two realities, the Deanverse and the Nixonverse. Up until this point, again, we haven't seen anything from the Nixonverse, so our whole story, or the mythos, takes place entirely within the Deanverse. As we just talked about, this thing blew up. So the remnants of it, remnants you're about to see, took shelter over in the Nixonverse. Now, these things drastically changed the entire timeline of the Nixonverse. So if the Nixonverse was something that represented our reality, it does not anymore. So whatever the old Nixonverse might have been, that is now completely done away with. Now, I'm not going to go through a breakdown of the Nixonverse the way I am the main Monument Mythos series. And my reason for that isn't just because I think it would take a lot of time. I think, as I've proven at this point, I'm definitely not afraid of that. But because I believe the main purpose of the Nixonverse is your experience as you watch it. As a matter of fact, I think your experience is more important in the Nixonverse than it is in the Monument Mythos. So let me explain what I mean by that. The Monument Mythos, as you've probably gathered, is a very satirical representation of the United States. And not just in the fact that its monuments and presidents are used for a lot of the story's beats, but also for the very nature of what and how things are being described. One of the biggest ones that people point out online is what happens in the rest of the world, right? Like in the videos and even in my description of the Monument Mythos, I never mention how Canada is affected by part of the United States becoming a giant flesh monster. The entire world exploding seems to have no relevance outside of how it affects the American population. And that's kind of the point. I mean, even when we look at things like the Suez Canal crab video that takes place outside of the United States, the focus of that video is what happened to the American tourists who were coming to the Suez Canal. As Alex has said, the reason the stories are framed in this way is because it is a parody of how America often views itself. World politics and world events typically have no bearing outside of the United States. Even news in other countries tends to be consumed with whatever the United States is doing. Most Americans have no concept of elections or governments in countries outside of the US, whereas other countries are bombarded with information about whatever the current American election is. The American idea tends to insist upon itself in the same way that the world of the Monument Mythos insists on America. Several of the monsters within the mythos do the same thing. I mean, the Statue of Freedom is a slave whose name is Freedom and forced to sit on top of the Capitol dome. James Dean, the young presidential candidate who's anti-war and cool with the kids, ushers in the new age of conspiracy and control. The ADA, a group who claims to be for freedom and against the state, often hurts more people than they help. I mean, at the end of the series, they literally blow up the world. And I mean, come on, the giant monster that is underneath the entire planet controlling and destroying everything is an amalgamation of George Washington's body. The Monument Mythos is America relegated to myth, to things of the hyper-fantastical. And the Nixonverse is everything I just said, times 10. It is very zealous with its portrayal of the fantastical, and again, that's the point. Narrative often gives way to idea or the fantasy that's being portrayed. Not to say that there isn't a narrative, it's just not the focus. I think it could be argued that narrative is never the focus of the Monument Mythos. It's just the focus to nerds like me who want to come through afterwards and then tell you what it's all supposed to mean when that's not really the point. But the Nixonverse is interesting and ties back into the Monument Mythos timeline, so I'm going to give a very brief recap of it. This isn't a summary like I've given for the rest of the series, this is more so bullet points. So again, Mr. Manicord channel, linked in the description. Check it out, I highly recommend it. At the beginning of the Nixonverse, we see that when the horned serpent broke out of the earth, something shot off of it. This is played in tandem with a radio broadcast from an old Superman radio show, implying that whatever is flying off of the horned serpent is Superman, or at least Superman adjacent for this story. We see that within this world we're entering, or the Nixonverse, things are happening more in tune with the way they are in our reality. For example, James Dean dies in a car crash as he does in real life. But as we're going to see, an explosion in the other reality has drastically changed things within this universe. We also see through the description that the series is being put together by Ed Dwight. That doesn't mean anything to you now, but will later. Whatever this Superman being is, he is called the Son of Alcatraz. This, of course, being in reference to the Alcatraz as seen in the original Monument Mythos, the giant flesh monster thing, but also Superman's alternate title as the Son of Krypton. There are 3 figures we're going to meet in the Nixonverse that all have these supernatural powers, the first being the Son of Alcatraz, and the second one being the D-Day Night. It seems that D-Day takes place the same way it did in our reality. However, as D-Day is happening, the D-Day Night shows up and begins to save soldiers on both sides. He seems to be a force of good and, just like the Son of Alcatraz, very reminiscent of characters like Superman. However, during the fight, we're told that the Knight's helmet is knocked off. Whenever we see what the helmet looks like, it is the skull of the Horned Serpent. Now, this is strange. The Horned Serpent existed in the Deanverse, but then the Deanverse collapsed, right? And last we saw of the Horned Serpent, it was larger than a planet. So why here is its skull like 15 feet wide? Well, Alex has clarified that the Horned Serpent can change its size at will. Its true size is like, the planet-cracking behemoth that we saw at the end of Alcatraz Apocalypse. So whenever the universe collapsed, it seems that the Horned Serpent began to make its way over into the Nixonverse, but supposedly was killed by the Knight or the Son of Alcatraz or some other supernatural creature. Its skull, or the skull of George Washington, is now being used by the D-Day Night. We then meet our third superpowered figure, the Queen of the Lunarians. The Queen's encountered when the first astronauts set out on the moon. John Glenn, the first American to enter space in our reality, but in this reality, due to things being changed up since the Deanverse exploded, John Glenn is among the first men to set foot on the moon. John Glenn tells Ed Dwight, another astronaut, to shoot the Queen, but when this has no effect, the Queen simply removes John Glenn from reality. She says that a great division is coming and that people need to be prepared. Now, this is the part of the Nixonverse that a lot of people were very confused on and made a lot of jokes online, and I do agree it is very funny. But when you look at the series in context of, again, the satire it makes more sense, even if it is still comical. But I think that's kind of the point. We're shown that in this universe, during the course of Vietnam, the Americans used a superpower who was in the form of Jesus Christ. This thing, appearing as Jesus on the cross, begins to carpet bomb Vietnam and turn it into a new American property known as Bethlehem. All that stuff I mentioned earlier about how a lot of the themes from the Monument Mythos are a parody or a play on American ideas, using an image of Jesus to carpet bomb another country and then make it a territory of yours, all in the name of peace and love. We then see another video from the astronauts on the moon who run into the form of Richard Nixon. This form of Nixon is effectively God. We'll talk about what that means in a minute. But for now, let's go back to our 3 superheroes who are running around changing history. We're told that after the Son of Alcatraz traveled back to his home in Alaska, he was attacked by nukes by the US government. We're told that during the Korean War, the last son of Alcatraz meddled in the war to save more lives. Of course, the American government can't allow this person to exist, so whenever the last son travels back to his home in Alaska, he is attacked by nukes. In the process, the last son is seriously injured and loses an eye. In the meantime, back on the moon, the astronauts shoot the Queen of the Lunarians, and she loses an eye. That eye is then brought back to Earth and placed inside of the injured son of Alcatraz. This allows the Son of Alcatraz to be brainwashed, and the government begins to use him as a superweapon. The last son of Alcatraz effectively has infinite power and can shapeshift into any form, so the government has him transform into the figure of Jesus on the cross as a show of American peace and prosperity, and then tells him to go carpet bomb Vietnam. This is where the giant bomber cross comes from. The next episode in the Nixonverse series is a 40-minute episode, or nearly 40-minute episode, called The House in the Ocean. And there's a couple things you need to understand the House in the Ocean, or really the Monument Mythos as a whole. For one, The House in the Ocean was a series that was created by Alex unrelated to the Monument Mythos or the Nixonverse or anything like that. As a matter of fact, if I recall correctly, I may be wrong in this, but I believe it predates the Nixonverse entirely. But then, after the House in the Ocean series was complete, it all disappeared from YouTube, only to eventually be brought back as this mega episode in the middle of the Nixonverse. And to understand why that is, there's something you need to understand about Alex himself. A part of me feels bad talking about this because it's something personal, it's something individual of the creator, and in a lot of these analysis, I don't like, being like, oh, well, the creator said this about their life, or this aspect of their life may be where they get this inspiration or whatever. Because I'm, usually let the art speak for itself, but I feel this is very important to the series and very profound as well. And I think it's something that shows the heart that goes into it. And it's particularly important for understanding some elements of the series going forward, specifically the House in the Ocean. So while I understand this may be personal to the creator, I say it with all due respect, and the only reason really that I am saying it is because I think it's beautiful. Not what happened, obviously, but how Alex made something beautiful out of it. So Alex, whose real name, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, is Alex Casanis, has been making videos like this since he was in like the 7th grade, if not earlier. The first video on his channel, if you scroll all the way back, Mr. Manicore, was made when he was in the 7th grade. He has always had this passion for filmmaking and for creation. And a lot of that passion seems to have been spurred by his parents' support. Particularly, Alex has spoken a lot about how in his early days of filmmaking, his dad enjoyed a lot of his early animations. And it was part of this enjoyment and encouragement that pushed Alex forward to make new projects, things like the Monument Mythos. Over the course of the production of Season 2 of the Monument Mythos, Alex's father passed away. Now, I would not ever dream of digging up this information and then telling it to you all now. I think that would be ghastly, and I certainly wouldn't mention it. But Alex has mentioned it multiple times in his community post. I believe he may have mentioned it on Instagram, some of his inspirations behind it, and a lot in Q&As and other discussions he gives about the series. Because that, as you can imagine, impacted Alex and changed a lot of his art moving forward. Back in Season 2, the episode Fallen Father was actually made in response to his father dying. And Lauren talking about how she misses her father, and in that video her father visits her as a king and crown, but more so the themes of losing a father and wishing they were there comes from Alex personally. So he has spoken about while he was working as an artist, he had a lot of complex emotions, a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, and he didn't really know how to phrase that or what to do with it, so he just began to create, which is, in my opinion, one of the best things you can do with that kind of tragedy. And one of the first things he created was the House in the Ocean. He said it was kind of a callback to the videos that his father would particularly enjoy. Things that were perhaps a bit more absurdist, more of these short little moments of absurdism that are kind of connected with a through line. But then after the House in the Ocean was concluded, he removed the entire series from YouTube. And he said that he did this as a memory or as an idea of what his father meant to him. We all watched The House in the Ocean. We all saw the series, or at least those of us who were fortunate enough to watch it as it came out, but then it was gone. It wasn't here anymore. It still exists. It exists in our mind. It's something we can remember, but we don't get to be around it. We don't get to touch it anymore. We just get to remember it. And he said he wanted the House in the Ocean to represent the feeling of a lost loved one. They're not there anymore. You can't go back. You can't spend time with them. Those times are past, but you can remember the times you had. So he deleted the series effectively as kind of a testament to his father. Just as he dealt with loss, we now deal with the loss of this series. And it was kind of a beautiful art piece in that regard. But there was this kind of bittersweet element to it, because it's the idea that it really is gone forever. We can't touch it. We can't get any part of it back out, which is profound, absolutely, but tragic as well. And then in the midst of the Nixonverse, Alex brought the series back. And he would elaborate on this in things like Community Post, where he said that his father really isn't gone. He still has his memories of him. He still has the fact he's making the series itself, the fact he's making the Monument Mythos, that is a piece that his father created. His father is still here in that regard. So Alex brings the series back and then adds a phrase to the end of it that says, "No one is gone forever." And that's something that gets lost on people who come into the series late, because they just come through, they see a 40-minute video called House in the Ocean, they see the phrase "no one is gone forever," and that doesn't really mean a lot. But the reason I wanted to bring that up and say it to you is because I want it to mean a lot. That's a beautiful thing to make out of loss. The realization at first that they're gone, but the realization that they're still here in some way. And I think it's beautiful. And it's for that reason that The House in the Ocean is one of my favorite parts of the series, because of how profound that episode was to watch its entire adaptation. Because after I made the first video, I watched all of The House in the Ocean as it came out. I watched it go away, and then I got to see it come back. And that's beautiful. Thank you, Alex. It really meant a lot, especially as someone who, I'm not going to get emotional yet, that will come later in this video, but as someone who really loves his father and cherishes the time he has with him, to see you kind of go through that process and then make it into something that means something, to make it into art, that was beautiful. Thank you. So what is The House in the Ocean? It's Obama touch killer wood chip. The House in the Ocean is absurd. Like the Nixon verse is absurd compared to the Monument Mythos. House in the Ocean is absurd compared to the Nixon verse. It is about a giant house, or at least the mirage of a house that is floating out in the middle of the ocean, and supposedly it can kill you, or maybe not, or it's like a threat or something, who knows. We get clips of like Obama going to the ocean and telling people to stay away, and the Obama impersonation is really funny, by the way. Obama says to stay away from killer wood chips and to not let any of them get inland, but then the video gets altered, because in the original, Obama said at the ending, this is the words that are coming out of my mouth. In the original, Obama said at the ending that you shouldn't look at the house in the ocean, but then in an altered version at the end, it seems that the house or something edits it to tell us that we do want to look at the house. So the house wants to be looked at. And then we see that in 1934, it became a common practice for the elite or the wealthy to go house hunting. They would take these boats out onto the ocean and shoot at houses. Or at least it's supposed to be. The purpose of this series is that you watch it and this is all bizarre and it's crazy. It's very fun. It's a fun series, The House in the Ocean. So it's like where I said the Nixon verse isn't super narrative heavy, The House in the Ocean especially. But there's something about, well, either it's one house or there's multiple houses. However many houses there were, rich presidents used to go shoot at them. We get an interview from Ronald Reagan where he talks about how much fun he had shooting houses. And then we hear a phone recording of George and Laura Bush getting killed by a house that ambushed them. And then we see in this amalgamation of an image that Laura Bush's body is stuck in the upper window because the pressure in the house was so extreme, it caused her to inflate into this ball of flesh that got stuck as it was getting sucked out the window. But then, oh no, a restoration comes and says that the Bushes were actually saved, not ambushed. But then it turns out that the killer wood chips that Obama warned us about were actually made by the government to stop the houses. So the killer wood chips that everyone's afraid of were made during the Clinton administration and are actually a good thing, or they were a good thing, to stop the house from attacking if the house even does attack. And then we get a story of something called the Crescent King. The Crescent King seems to be a sort of fabled old god from legend who is coming to Earth to possess a human vessel. And at the end of the first video we see, it seems like the Crescent King has possessed a vessel. We then see another update that says that the Laura Bush picture is fake and that that's not actually her body. And that there has never been a house in the ocean. Instead, the only house in the ocean that really exists is the house in your head. Your brain is what you use to think and process, and it's constantly floating in fluid. Just as the house in the ocean is a legend or a mirage shared by many, everything you see and everything you perceive is a result of the house in the ocean that's in your head. We're told that Walt Disney sent a transmission of Mickey Mouse to the house in the ocean, but the house sent it back heavily altered. This alteration shows us the legend of the Crescent King, and that from simply witnessing images of the Crescent King and knowing that he exists, we have allowed him to enter the house in the ocean in our heads. So then we see images from what I think is the reality within the house in the ocean world, where it shows that there is a full takeover of this Crescent King entity. There's a giant robot named Chase AI that goes rogue and makes its way down to South America and eventually Antarctica. The Chase AI sends a message to another reality, and then after that it seems that the whole world is either destroyed or phases into the corner world / Wonderland. We then get the message that our brain is the house in the ocean, and that now the stories that we've seen are implanted within us, effectively a home for the Crescent King. So pretty much everything we saw in the house in the ocean, at least within the world of the Nixonverse, was a fictional series, but now because we've seen it, it has given the Crescent King a gateway into our brains. In other words, no element of the story really mattered aside from the Crescent King. Stuff about the killer wood chips or the house in the ocean, it was all an illusion or a facade for the Crescent King to use neural pathways effectively to become real. It's like a mimetic plague. Just the idea that it exists or the image of it, the representation of it, is enough for it to find a gateway into reality. So how does that translate back into the Nixonverse? Well, we see that the last son, after the damage he caused in Vietnam, becomes defeated and decides to make himself into a house floating on the ocean. The Lunarians come, which are all the offsprings of the Queen of the Lunarians that we saw on the moon, and the Lunarians demand that the son of Alcatraz become their king. He doesn't want to, but the Lunarians are not asking for his consent, and instead turn him into the Crescent King, their ruler. Effectively, after the son of Alcatraz became a house in the ocean that just floats off the coast, it became the thing of myth and legend, and stories got contorted, dating all the way back to presidents hunting it down, yada yada. Doesn't matter. What matters is that the son of Alcatraz was a literal house on the ocean, and stories were made up around it. The only true through line being that the Crescent King lives at the house in the ocean, because the house in the ocean, which is the son of Alcatraz, eventually becomes the Crescent King. That will make a little bit more sense, not entirely sense, but a bit more sense at the end of the Nixonverse series. The son of Alcatraz, now the Crescent King, begins to destroy human language, and people lose the ability to speak. A broadcaster named Alice Avenue, which is a play on Lois Lane, tells the story of a young boy who hit and killed James Dean. She says that this boy would later become the D-Day Knight and ask for the Knight to come and save them. See, the Queen of the Lunarians is effectively evil and trying to destroy humanity and language, and she's already stolen or recruited the last son of Alcatraz to do that. So the only superpowered figure left who can defeat the Lunarians and the son of Alcatraz, now the Crescent King, and save everyone is the D-Day Knight. However, after the broadcast is ended, the Knight picks up Alice Avenue and drops her off the Chrysler Building. From the dialogue, it seems that the D-Day Knight is beginning to lose his mind and became so enraged that Alice Avenue told his story that he killed her. The D-Day Knight says that it's okay, Alice Avenue isn't actually dead because in my world, statues held souls. Now, this is interesting because where do we know that statues have souls? That's right, back in the Monument Mythos. But there's no D-Day Knight in the Monument Mythos, right? So is the D-Day Knight from the Mythos somehow? Does this concept of statues holding souls something that's in the Nixonverse as well? But that doesn't make sense because he said back in my universe. The D-Day Knight basically goes insane. The Lunarians are destroying everything, and he's taking videos of a statue that he thinks is Alice Avenue because no, I didn't kill her. See, here she is as a statue. So he's doing great. And then it says that the D-Day Knight wears her head for a bit, kind of replacing the helmet of George Washington that he once had. Before it says that eventually the head falls off and his head becomes some conglomeration of something. After this, we see the autopsy of Ed Dwight. Again, Ed Dwight was one of the astronauts who was on the moon with the Queen of the Lunarians. And in the autopsy, it seems that he shot himself with a laser gun, and we'll later see that most of his body is ripped to shreds. But then when we see the footage that Ed Dwight recorded, things make a bit more sense. On the moon, Ed Dwight met Richard Nixon. Nixon explains that he was the only survivor of the Great Division, or effectively whenever the Deanverse fell apart and the Horned Serpent destroyed everything, and the universe imploded, and we saw what we thought was the last son of Alcatraz shoot out. That was in reality Richard Nixon. Now, the reason it's Richard Nixon, I believe, is kind of a cheeky joke by Alex, because the Deanverse, as it was called, is the name the community gave to the events of the Monument Mythos. And then there was another universe called the Nixonverse, which was seemingly never touched. So whenever Alex decides what historical character should go from the Deanverse to the Nixonverse, he picks Richard Nixon. Nixon effectively holds all of the power that existed within the Deanverse, all of the memories, all of its energy. So because of that, Nixon has become a reality-bending god. He sits here on the moon and has near infinite power. Nixon says that he created 3 figures to travel to Earth to see how this world would treat a being of immense energy. These 3 figures were the son of Alcatraz, the D-Day Knight, and the Queen of the Lunarians. So now we start to see some stuff together. Nixon came from the Deanverse, and he created 3 superheroes, effectively, who do not know that they are all part of Richard Nixon. They have their own backstory. We saw with the Alice Avenue broadcast that the D-Day Knight had an entire upbringing. None of them know that they're a part of Richard Nixon or of some previous universe. They just have some memories from it, like how the D-Day Knight said that in my universe, statues contain souls. But we see what those 3 figures are doing to reality. The Queen of the Lunarians has stolen the son of Alcatraz to make him into an evil king and destroy humanity's language. And the D-Day Knight's just killing people now. Nixon says that he has seen the damage this has caused and will destroy the son of Alcatraz, now the Crescent King. And that Ed Dwight, or no human, is meant to hear the things that Nixon is hearing and supposedly overcome with this incomprehensible knowledge. Either by energy of Nixon or the Queen of the Lunarians, or under his own volition, Ed Dwight turns the laser gun on himself, leading to the autopsy we saw earlier. So now the Queen of the Lunarians, who's effectively taken over everything except for the D-Day Knight, now comes to the Knight and asks for his assistance. The Knight is having nothing to do with her prophecy or anything related, so the Knight destroys the Lunarians and everything that they have done in what's called Alcatraz checkmate. Remember how the Alcatraz matter from the Deanverse just turned the entire country into a giant wasteland, effectively melted everything? That's what the D-Day Knight does here. And we're then shown a video from the ground, which, as you can see from the land around it, the D-Day Knight pretty much destroyed everything. But the son of Alcatraz, now the Crescent King, is lying in mourning. It says that grief can make you a monster, and it seems to have done that to the son of Alcatraz. But as the Crescent King raises his head, the text tells us that the horned serpent lives. Now, a lot of people watched this initially and thought that it's literally the horned serpent from the Monument Mythos, or in other words, it's George Washington now in this universe as the Crescent King, but that's not what it's saying. Remember how I said the Crescent King was like a mimetic hazard? Just knowing it exists, its energy is able to take control or take hold? Well, as Alex has explained in Q&As, that's effectively what the horned serpent is doing here. It's not saying that the horned serpent's literally alive, but that the memory of it, or the energy of it, has now been reborn. The Crescent King has become this monster of grief that has destroyed everything, and now has this infinite power, but nothing to use it on. And in that sense, the horned serpent lives through him. So everything's really bad in the Nixonverse. These 3 beings have effectively destroyed everything, but Nixon has a way to undo it. In the last episode, the Ed Dwight Paradox, Nixon says that he never intended to go to Earth and fight these creatures hand to hand, because that could destroy the universe. I mean, that's the same thing that we saw happen in the Deanverse. 2 powerful entities fought and everything was destroyed, and Nixon doesn't want to repeat that. Instead, Nixon tells Ed Dwight that if the characters of this story become fiction, if they are fictionalized, and humanity believes them to be the stuff of legends, then they lose their power. To fictionalize something is to take its cosmic energy away from it. This also gives reason to what the house in the ocean was. All those stories we saw about killer wood chips and a giant house and presidents used to go hunting in it, all that's fake. That was done as a way to remove energy from the son of Alcatraz, or from the giant house that was floating out in the ocean. To fictionalize something is to remove its power. And as we've seen, that worked because the Crescent King effectively has no power. But the Lunarians and the D-Day Knight and everything else needs to lose its power if the world is to be restored. So Ed Dwight sets about writing stories and comics of all of these creatures. And through his illustrations, through commissioning these monsters to the stuff of legend, their power is undone. Now, we don't know exactly to what capacity it is undone. I don't know if it changes history and undoes all of the damage that was caused, but it heals the world enough that Ed Dwight goes on to make more and more comics of these monsters. And from that, it seems that effectively, Ed Dwight saved humanity by relegating its nightmares to the stuff of stories. And we get the final message that in our universe, Ed Dwight makes monuments. Now, for one, within the actual narrative or whatever that's being crafted, this is effectively saying the evils of the Nixonverse were undone by someone making them into stories. And that effectively the universe was saved by the actions of Ed Dwight. Now, here's what's really cool, and one of the reasons I love the Monument Mythos so much, sure, breaking down all of these, through lines and characters, and this guy gets mentioned here, and this guy's mentioned over here, that's all well and good, but what I really like about it is moments like Ed Dwight. So in the real world, in our world, Ed Dwight was a candidate who was looking to be selected for the early Apollo missions. This was a very controversial decision at the time because Ed Dwight is black. But the Kennedy administration said that they wanted a black astronaut in the space race. So Ed Dwight went through all the trials, he went through all of the physical and mental training to be an astronaut, but in the final phase of the trial, he was skipped over. There was an outcry from social activists, and it's believed the Kennedy administration would have intervened had it not been for 1 month after Ed Dwight was skipped over. John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. Many believe that had it not been for the assassination, Ed Dwight could have been among the first men to ever make it to the moon. But in reality, Ed Dwight left the space program and eventually became an officer in the military before he retired, and now is an artist and sculptor. Now, I'm sure a lot of you probably would have never heard that story had Alex not chosen to make Ed Dwight the fableman or the storyteller who saves the universe at the end of the Nixonverse storyline. Sure, a lot of the stuff in the series is bizarre, and that's why I have fun with it, but I understand to other people it's kind of a turnoff, Not everyone wants to just melt their brain constantly with information like I do for some reason. But there's something about using a man who was passed over for one of the early moon trials to have him in this story be the orator who witnesses Nixon and hears his tales and then is able to save the universe through the act of storytelling. And then that final image of the real Ed Dwight making sculptures and just simply saying, in our universe, Ed Dwight makes monuments. There's something profound about that. I love it. And that's also why earlier in the series, all the way back to the first episode of the Nixonverse, the description says that it's created by Ed Dwight Comics. Because the entire series we're watching has now been made fiction by the actions of Ed Dwight and his saving of humanity. Also, for the rest of the Monument Mythos series, if you go to the comment section, you will often see a pinned comment from Ed Dwight Comics. Again, I am a nerd who's here to give the whataboutisms and talk about all the specifics and intricacies of the story, but the real experience of the Monument Mythos is to see things like this, to see things about the Nixonverse and all this alternate history, and make us ask questions or be more curious about our own. And doing things like Ed Dwight Comics, or making Nixon create these three gods effectively who battle out and almost destroy the universe, elements of national monuments and James Dean, and everything else. I think it's so cool. Is it perfectly comprehensible at times? Absolutely not. Is it the best story writing I've ever seen? Well, no. But I love it. I'm so enthralled with it. I hope it stays exactly what it is. And as long as Alex keeps making it, I'm going to keep talking about it. So that seems to be the conclusion of everything, right? We had the Monument Mythos that was destroyed in a giant explosion, World Serpent got out, blah, blah, blah. And then we have the Nixonverse that ended with Ed Dwight capturing everything in the pages of a comic book, relegating it to fiction, and saving the world. So Deanverse is dead, but the Nixonverse is fine, right? All is done. No. See, Alex has said that originally he did plan for season 2 of the Monument Mythos to be its end, and the Nixonverse was just kind of a spin-off from that. But nerds like me really like the Monument Mythos and wanted to see more done with it. So as Alex began to think of inspiration and what he wanted to do going forward, he thought of a storyline to continue the series. Well, kind of continue the series. Season 3 is kind of a soft reboot, but also not a reboot, but it's really confusing, but it's also really cool, so let's talk about that. Because you're probably thinking to yourself, where do you even go after the entire world explodes? But if you'll remember, there was that one cute note in Alcatraz Apocalypse that said Cathronaut A will transmit data. So what does that even mean? To find out, let's get into Monument Mythos Season 3. For one, the teaser for Monument Mythos Season 3 is very sweet. Remember, Alex originally didn't want to continue the series, perhaps in part because of his dad's passing. He wanted to be done with it, but now he's found this vigor to continue. So in the teaser, he says, "For Dad, for you, no one is gone forever," which... my heart. The first video in Season 3 is actually the first video on Alex's entire channel. This was, again, a video he made back in 7th grade, and the video simply titled Mr. Manticore. Stared at an image for a while, and then you stare at a picture of a manticore, and then it's just kind of a bunch of jump scare images of different demons as really loud music plays. Doesn't have anything really to do with the lore of the Monument Mythos, but the Mr. Manticore theme will show up later. And it also makes sense as to why now Mr. Manticore is the name of Alex's channel. Now we're on to our first video of Season 3 of the Monument Mythos, Washington Wanderer. It begins with a replay of Leonard Moreland's final words from Season 2. We're told that on February the 20th of 2022, Wonderland went silent, which is really weird considering it's normally full of really loud noise and lightning strikes. But a new song began on February the 22nd. Of course, February the 22nd, as we know from Alcatraz Apocalypse, is the day that originally this entire universe ended. And while you're probably wondering how this entire universe even exists at this point, we then hear a voice message from Howard Melrose to a woman named Eunice. Howard Melrose is the author who's been mentioned a few times at this point. He's the one who leaked the story of the Giza Guardians and Freedom being, killing people in the Grand Canyon. He is the one who had the original sighting of the Lincoln Looker, and he's the one who talked about the Suez Canal crab. So Melrose is uncovering the government and the secrets of this extra-dimensional world. Melrose says that Cathronaut C went to Wonderland and discovered something earth-shattering. That Wonderland keeps copies of all living inhabitants. Melrose then says that one of these copies killed Cathronaut C. Before we have time to think of what this means, we then see the destroyed Washington Monument. Again, this is in the aftermath of the 2003 incident, and there's what appears to be a woman standing on top of it. For the video asks the question for us, who is the Washington Wanderer? Now, I'll go ahead and tell you now, we're not told anything specifically about who the Wanderer is at this point in the timeline. You're not going to find out for the rest of this video unless someone's got a really cool theory. I'm sure it's related to Virginia somehow, because if you remember, Virginia was there whenever the Washington event happened, whenever, all the absentees were found. But she was recovered on the ground with the helicopters. So if I had to guess, this is her copy, because this comes right after Melrose said that Wonderland keeps copies of everyone, and Virginia was in there for some time. So I think this is Virginia's copy on top of the monument. There's not enough info at this point to be sure. That's just my guess. Before the video ends, we get shots of what appears to be the special trees moving around within Wonderland. Now this we will have an answer for by the end of this video, just not right now. This brings us to our second video in Season 3, Monument Mythology. Monument Mythology is effectively a presentation about what appears to be a sort of Egyptian lore or history, and it's telling us the birth of the universe as we know it. The short version is that originally there were two beings, the tree and the serpent. The serpent creates these giant eggs which become the worlds, gods, and life itself. The Earth World egg is ruled by the god of chaos, Entropis. There's 4 other lesser gods who rule on Earth with Entropis. One day, as Entropis is walking around, specifically in Giza, a lightning strike appears and beheads Entropis. 3 baby serpents find the head of Entropis and decide that they can crawl inside of it and use Entropis' form to trick the other gods to give them power. However, the serpents know after this trick is done, they're going to need to kill the gods in order to save themselves. So the 3 baby serpents go to Man and have Man build them a weapon. This weapon is a soldier made of Giza glass, or in other words, the first Giza warrior, who they name Pyrasma. The 3 serpents within the head of Entropis go to the 4 lesser gods, and the 4 lesser gods grant the serpents power, not knowing that it's actually the serpents they're giving the power to. As soon as this is done, Pyrasma appears and kills the other 4 gods. As thanks for killing the 4 gods, the serpents give life to all of statue kind. These 3 serpents, now great and powerful, each go to a different world in order to grow. One serpent goes to a world that's too cold and dies. Another serpent goes to a world that's too hot and dies. But the last serpent lives within the earth and grows to great proportions. In other words, the horned serpent. And then we're told that this video was made by the Dean Museum of Natural History. Now, Alex has clarified, before I go making this claim and you all think I'm crazy, Alex has clarified that the things in this video are not to be fully trusted. I think that they are more representative of some things within the series. For example, it says that the horned serpent was made this whole way and then just went under the earth, but we know for a fact that the horned serpent's George Washington, so that doesn't make sense. And as we're going to find out very shortly, the serpent that went to the cold planet did not die. So the story's part about the 2 other serpents dying isn't true either. And other than the lightning and Giza glass appearing in Giza, the whole thing about Entropis being the first crown, Alex has said isn't true. I imagine this being the first creation of the statues as warriors isn't true. But the part about them granting life to all of statue kind does make sense, not only because we've seen figures like Freedom that are living statues, but there's also mentions in things like the Nixon verse when the D-Day Knight says that all statues contain souls where he's from. So maybe some great power did give souls to every statue. I'm not going to pick the pieces out now because there's not enough information from the rest of the series to tell us which parts of this video are true and which parts are false. More so just the idea that I think there is an evil entity, the serpent, and either a good or neutral entity in the trees that are kind of fighting for dominance throughout this world. I'll explain that more later. But yeah, as for the rest of it, don't worry about it. Weird fake mythology stuff. Moving on. And in our next video, we finally have an explanation as to how this universe even exists. With the next video of Season 3, Angel Ashes. Angel Ashes picks up after the battle between Freedom and the Angel. Again, this is the battle that we saw back in Alcatraz Apocalypse. And if you're wondering who would win that fight, it would be the Angel, as we see Freedom's head lying on the ground. Now, remember back in Alcatraz Apocalypse how it said Cathonaut A would take data from one universe to the other. We're not exactly sure what universe this is taking place in. Angel standing there on what appears to be the moon. Maybe it's the shattered remnants of Earth that it's standing on. But wherever this location is that the Angel's standing, Cathonaut A appears in front of it. Cathonaut A and Angel being the only survivors, as far as we know, of that entire universe, of the entire original Deanverse, at least the only survivors that haven't been made into Cornerfolk. Cathonaut A appears to the Angel, and the Angel says that they're sorry. Which, yeah, I mean, they were just trying to hide out in the middle of the woods, and then Freedom attacked them, so the Angel tried to defend itself, and the Earth exploded. The Angel asks for another chance, and the Cathonaut says that their chance is over. Everything's been destroyed, but the Angel still has one chance to save everyone. The Cathonaut says that if the Angel can divide himself into millions and billions and trillions of particles, that energy would flow backwards through time. And perhaps through minute means, the Angel's ashes could change history and prevent the Armageddon. So the Angel agrees with the Cathonaut and divides himself into nothing. And we see a calendar of the Earth that was supposed to end on February the 22nd of 2022 now make it to February 23rd. So that's how this universe even exists. Cathonaut A found Angel after the battle in another universe or on the remnants of Earth before it exploded or what have you, and the Cathonaut told the Angel to divide himself so that time can be rewritten and the explosion never happened. So, it looks like the Deanverse exists again, right? We've got the Deanverse. Everything blew up at one point, but now it's all put back together. So does that mean I can get out all my old whiteboards and all my old ideas and theories and timelines I made? No, because the angel doing this changed pretty much everything, and no theory I had from the original series even makes that much sense anymore, and don't worry about it, because I'm certainly not. Also, does this mean that part of the United States is still covered by the flesh mass of Alcatraz? Does that still mean special trees are everywhere killing people? Does that still mean that Rockefeller's president? I don't know, but who cares? Because now the Earth exists past February the 22nd of 2022, and the only thing that really matters is characters like Angel and Freedom and whatnot still exist, and they were the coolest part anyway. So now that the Earth exists, let's see what happens in the near future. For the first time in the entire series, we see something from the year 2023, meaning that the Earth has survived. In 2023, we see that Elon Musk has made his way to Mars and has immediately began a giant mine to mine Martian glass. This Martian glass is effectively a Martian alternative to Giza glass. We see that on Mars, Musk is using canyon crowns to excavate and work, and that this is causing a lot of problems because a bunch of pyramids that turn into Washington Monument looking things pop up, which probably isn't good. And eventually Elon Musk nukes some ice caps in order to continue his mine, and releases a giant Martian serpent. Okay, I kind of blew past the Elon Musk Mars stuff because that doesn't really matter for the story. That's more of a sight gag than anything. Haha, Musk made it to Mars, made it into basically a giant diamond mine. Insert politically relevant joke here. But what matters is, remember in that whole mythology thing, how it said there were 3 serpents? One went to a cold planet, a hot planet, and Earth, and the Earth one's the only one that lived? Well, that's not true, because the cold planet, or as we found out now, Mars, still has a living serpent. And on blowing open this mine, the serpent spills out. Now that the serpent's out and effectively hatched, just like the ADA tried to make the horned serpent do on Earth at the end of the Deanverse, the Martian serpent is now barreling through space, coming to Earth, which is probably bad. That also probably means that the serpent at the hot planet lives as well, which is more than likely Venus. If Mars is the cold one, the Venus is probably the hot one. And in a Q&A, Alex mentioned that there are planned expeditions that humanity has to Venus, so we'll probably see that one later. But the Venus one isn't currently flying towards space at Earth, so the Martian serpent's the priority for now. In the next video after Angel, we see that the story is being told by Dwight Comics. Now, is this more of just kind of a fun reference to the Nixon verse, telling us that Ed Dwight's still making stories, or is this Ed Dwight attempting to put everything into stories so that it doesn't become real? Or perhaps the fact that we're reading it, maybe that's already happened, and the entire series at this point is all fiction. I don't know anymore. For now, we're going to treat it like it's all real, and maybe Ed Dwight's just chronicling it rather than making it a fake story. This excerpt is from the Babylon Forest in 2022. Again, this is where and when the original battle that destroyed the Earth took place. We see that the Angel approaches Freedom, and previously, again, this is where the world ends. Angel attacks Freedom, and the attack ends up destroying the world. But here, we see that future Angel's ashes have changed the past and entered the past Angel's mind. This causes the Angel to realize that if he attacks Freedom right now, the entire Earth will be destroyed. So the Angel simply asks Freedom to kill him, and Freedom decapitates the Air Force One Angel. So in an act of martyrdom, the Angel realizes that if this battle continues, sure, he might live, but the world will be destroyed. So the Angel lays down his life and allows Freedom to kill him. However, if you'll remember how Giza glass works, it doesn't cut things, it just separates them. Again, the whole wireless thing. So it's not like the Angel's been killed per se, his head's been cut off. Does that mean that the Angel's now going to become a canyon crown? We'll find out in a minute. But for now, we're moving on to another video titled Golden Gate Girl. Here's where we start to see that the Angel's actions, in other words, the action of disintegrating himself and his ashes going throughout history, has changed the world much further than just his decision to die in front of Freedom. We hear a phone call from Eunice Dean, the sister of James Dean, to Howard Melrose. Now at this point, James Dean is not president, and Howard Melrose seems to not yet be a journalist. Eunice is standing atop the Golden Gate Bridge, and talks to Howard on the phone and tells Howard that if he ever feels lonely or ever needs to talk to someone, to simply talk to Eunice, and she'll hear him in Wonderland. Eunice then steps off the bridge, ending her life. Now, a lot of implications here. It seems that Eunice is perhaps going mad. I mean, we're never given, at least not at this point in the series, given any more clarification on her character. But that line about, I'll hear you in Wonderland, maybe means she knew more of the universe or of Wonderland and multi-dimensions and all that stuff than the average person did, and maybe that drove her to madness. But either way, Howard Melrose is the last person she talked to. That will come up in a minute, but a more touching note to think about is Eunice said, if you ever need anything, simply call out to me and I'll hear it in Wonderland. Well, if you go back and listen to the series, every time Howard Melrose has a phone call or a one-sided phone call, he's always talking to Eunice. All the way back in Lincoln Looker, he says, hey Eunice, and then talks about seeing someone reach up out of the Lincoln statue. And he did it a couple episodes ago when he describes that Wonderland has copies. So for one, that's kind of a touchy note that Howard remembered Eunice throughout his life, but it also raises another question. If supposedly this chance encounter happened, and I'll explain what the quotes around chance mean in a minute, but if this chance encounter happened in this universe, and it caused Howard to remember Eunice, to think about her moving forward, that's all well and good. But as far as we know, this encounter didn't happen back in the previous Deanverse, right? Because now the Deanverse has all been messed up because the Angel Ashes have gone back through time and changed everything. So if this conversation never took place in the original Deanverse, then why was he still talking to Eunice in that? Whatever. I'm not saying this to imply there's not answers to it. I'm sure there's answers to it. As with every, ARG horror series I cover or whatever, I am putting together the pieces before they're all laid out. So I'm sure Alex has an answer to it. It's more so just my frustration and wanting to be the first one to do it and get here early and whatever, but that's what I get. We then hear a phone call between Dean and Montgomery Clift. This seems to be right before James Dean's presidential run. However, after the death of his sister Eunice, Dean seems too broken up to run for president and instead asks for Montgomery Clift to run, and Dean will run as his vice. So sure enough, Monty Clift runs for president with Dean in the vice position. This is why I said that stuff about it doesn't make sense for Howard to be talking to Eunice in the original Deanverse, or at least from what I understand yet. Again, I'm sure an answer's out there, I just don't know it yet. Because we see that Eunice's death in this timeline was so affecting and so tragic to Dean that he chose not to run for president. So obviously that didn't happen in the original timeline, because in the original, Dean runs for president and becomes president, and there seems to be no mention of Eunice's death. So because of that, it seems when Eunice dies, Dean doesn't become president. So then if Eunice didn't die and none of that happened, the original Deanverse, then why was Melrose talking to her? But whatever. So moving forward, I'm going to be describing this new universe that Season 3 is operating in as the Cliftverse, and I'll explain why. When the Angel reset history, its effects of its ashes trickled down and completely destroyed everything in the Deanverse as we know it. Not that it matters, because as discussed, the Deanverse blew up, so anything other than that's probably for the best. This new timeline created out of the remnants of what the Deanverse was, I am going to refer to as the Cliftverse, given the president of Montgomery Clift. So technically, there are 4 universes in total within the Monument Mythos, 3 of which we've seen something of. There is the original Deanverse that the seasons 1 and 2 of Monument Mythos are about. That's now blown up. There is the Nixonverse, as we saw with the whole Nixon, 3 superheroes, whatever. And now we have the altered Deanverse that has been altered by the Angel, which again I'm calling the Cliftverse. The reason there's technically 4 is because there is the version of the Nixonverse that existed before the Deanverse blew up and affected it, but we never saw anything of it, and given this point in the timeline, we're probably not. So there's effectively 3. The Deanverse, the Nixonverse, and the Deanverse version 2, the Cliftverse. Some people have said that it's likely there's multiple universes. and like a near infinite amount of universes, and the whole thing could get into a multiverse thing, but I think that's lame, and it also makes my head hurt. So for now, we're just sticking with 2. 2.5, 3, whatever. So now that we're all in the same confusing place of reality, let's move on to the next video, Cathonaut C. If you'll remember, Cathonaut C is the one Melrose mentioned, found a way into Wonderland and discovered that there are copies and was subsequently killed by a copy. After the Martian Serpent left Mars, it opened up the Martian Serpent metastructure. This is similar how to back on Earth, after the Horned Serpent left, it created the Horned Serpent metastructure. In other words, the inside of Mars is now a passageway into Wonderland. It says that the Cathonauts were sent to further investigate American Wonderland Syndrome. We'll find out what that is in just a minute. The men travel past the daunting structure of the Martian Serpent and into Wonderland. It's clarified for us later that this is the same Wonderland. In other words, because Wonderland is just a reality that exists between worlds and between dimensions, the Mars Wonderland and the Earth Wonderland are both doors into the same place. While Cathonaut C is in Wonderland, he finds a young child and begins to take care of it. He protects it, feeds it, gives it a home until one day the child disappears. Cathonaut C finds sheets of paper and begins to write down his story. This story is supposedly the illustrations we're seeing now. Finally, it says that Cathonaut C joins the child. We don't know what this means specifically, but we know from Melrose's account that Cathonaut C was killed by a copy. If copies of people are kept in Wonderland, then maybe a copy of somebody killed him, or perhaps copies themselves are inherently dangerous, and maybe the Cathonaut saw a copy of the child, and whenever he got close, he was killed. We then again hear the final words of Leonard Moreland, but here we see that the illustration of the child the Cathonaut found is Everett Arnoldson. This is a huge revelation. If you've been keeping up with the series, this was a big aha moment for me. Everyone thought it was very funny. Wonderland Syndrome. Oh! 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 Hold on. Hold on. Because Virginia was pregnant with Everett whenever she passed through Wonderland, and when she came out the other side, she was no longer pregnant. It seems the child was just lost somewhere between here and there. So it seems that all this time, that unborn child had been living within Wonderland, until this Cathonaut found it and began taking care of it. And as soon as we find out that that child is Everett Arnoldson, we see a picture of the baby Stretch over a description of American Wonderland Syndrome, or AWS. Remember how Washington was in Wonderland, and for whatever reason, it seems that his body began to stretch and pull across the dimensions? Well, apparently that wasn't unique to Washington, and as a matter of fact, happens to pretty much everyone who is stuck in Wonderland for any length of time, including the young baby Everett. We see a final video that shows trees moving around with the label that this is Everett Arnoldson. So, it seems like people who stay stuck in Wonderland become these giant amalgamated tree creatures. Not that every special tree is a living person, but living people can become monsters that resemble special trees. This explains why back in Washington Wonderland, Virginia went to see a talking tree on top of the Rockefeller Plaza that told her to go to the DC Monument. And this explains Alex's description that the trees in Wonderland were specifically drawn to resemble a human upside down with a very long neck. This also explains why in Washington Wonderland, the description said that Everett is a large creature who has been seen roaming around the Babylon forest. In the first video when I saw that, I had no idea what to make of it. I just said, well, that's weird, and moved on. But it turns out it was a setup for this. Everett was in Wonderland for so long he became a giant creature. And eventually, as seen by the description in Washington Wonderland, he made his way out, but now he's just a beast that roams around the forest. Now you may be asking yourself, okay, if everyone who goes to Wonderland for any length of time becomes this giant tree thing, that makes sense. But if that's the case, then what happened to Virginia? Because Virginia went to the DC Monument, and supposedly she said she was like falling for hundreds of years or whatever, and she came out seemingly fine. At least in all her stories of painting and getting a lobotomy, there's no mention of her being this long, distorted person. And I think that's because, again, accidentally, she traded Everett for herself. Remember how the tree that told her to go to the DC monument said that you'll have to exchange a life for your own? That doesn't make sense for most people because it sounds like the other Washington absentees just showed up, like by themselves, so what life did they exchange? I think the life they exchanged is they allowed their form and body to be horribly contorted into these tree monsters to get thrown back into the reality they want, but Virginia, who went in pregnant, accidentally had that happen to her unborn son. Her son became the giant monster, and she was physically fine and able to just walk out. Again, that's all theory on my end as to why Virginia was safe. That might have some answer as to why her copy, if it is her copy, again, that's also, I'm using theories on top of theories, but if that is her copy standing on top of the monument in Washington Wanderer, it may be because she was the only Washington absentee to be found in a physically fine condition. Because AWS is common enough that, there's a diagnosis for it. It says one of the treatment options is euthanasia, which is really sad, but probably fitting. What that doesn't answer, though, is how Virginia and her friends went to Wonderland back at the Rockefeller Plaza and didn't become these giant tree creatures, unless they were in there for like a really short length of time. But it seems like, she was running around with the older Everett, the other man named Everett, which not even getting into what that might be yet. But like Virginia and her friends teleported at the Rockefeller Center and didn't become these things, so that doesn't make a lot of sense. But my theory is she traded Everett for herself on accident. Because time's really weird in Wonderland, so maybe the Everett who was helping her was her son Everett grown up just before he became a tree thing. But then again, at the same time, like in the AWS logo, we see a baby getting stretched, not an adult man. So I think that the transformation started to Everett when he was young. And also it doesn't make sense for Everett to grow all the way up, nothing happened, and then he just, like over the course of a week or whatever, becomes the AWS monster, which we'll see what Everett looks like in a bit, and it's not great. But yeah, Everett became a giant tree monster. That explains the caption on Washington Wonderland. I think that explains why Virginia didn't become a tree monster. And overall, what a sad story Everett has. He was an infant, a fetus, like not even born yet, thrown into this hellish nightmare, and then Cathronaut C takes care of him, but then that guy dies, and Everett's all alone. Everett is truly a tragic character, and I really like what Alex does with him. But before we get to that, we need to get on to my proudest moment of this entire series, Dean Devil. If you've seen my first video, or know anything about how I talk about the series, the number one theory, the number one thing I've been pushing this whole time is I think James Dean is the devil. That's because he was feeding people to monuments in the original Dean-verse, and he claims to be this real swag, charismatic guy. But he conveniently is like pushing for, special trees and, feeding people to monsters and all that stuff. I said before, and I'll say it again, the only way I think he's not 100% evil is if the trees aren't fed, if they'll just kill everything. But even then, I think he's still evil. I've always been convinced that this dude's the devil. So when I saw the title of this video, Dean Devil, I got so excited. In the beginning, we're told that Howard Melrose is being hunted by the FBI. This is because, remember how Melrose was the last person Eunice Dean ever talked to? Well, that's because the media is claiming that during that phone call, Melrose verbally assaulted Eunice and pushed her to choose death. Rod Serling, who in this universe is an FBI agent, which is a very fun take, I'll give him that, says that Melrose is dangerous, and if anyone has any information, to call a hotline labeled Dean Deliverance. Which, again, what kind of guy who's not the devil makes a hotline called that? Dean wants Melrose dead as he blames Melrose for the death of his sister. As a matter of fact, Dean wants him dead so bad that after hearing that Melrose is getting on a plane, James Dean steals Air Force Two and runs it directly into Melrose's plane. So in this moment, the two of them hit. It shows a brief flash of James Dean's car wreck, which is a fun little note to the idea that Dean getting in a wreck is sort of a cosmic event. But then it seems that right at the moment of death, Howard Melrose and James Dean are pulled before Cathonaut A. Now, if you remember, Cathonaut A is, effectively God at this point. If Nixon left the Dean-verse and had all the power and energy that he had to do everything that he did over in the Nixon-verse, then Cathonaut A reasonably would have that same power. And the only thing we've seen Cathonaut A do at this point is convince the Angel to rewrite history, which seemed to work. But now, history is going not good again because James Dean is so furious, so ready to kill Melrose, that he's jeopardizing the entire timeline. Because if Dean dies, then the universe starts to fall apart again and everything gets real wonky. So at the moment of impact, Cathonaut A pulls Howard Melrose and James Dean out of reality to effectively give them a stern talking. The Cathonaut explains that these two men are forces destined to battle each other, but that the destruction of the universe would be brought on by them if they continue down this path. Effectively, the two are forces that are imperative to the existence of the universe. James Dean and Howard Melrose, in whatever iteration of the Deanverse exists, are both figures who are destined to do great things. And I don't mean great in a good way, I mean great as in an impactful way. These two massive figures of history must exist, but they are constantly clashing against each other. We saw that in the Deanverse if, indirectly, James Dean becomes president and does all of his actions to proliferate the trees and this unseen reality, and Melrose constantly exposes whatever James Dean or the government is doing. And here, this is why earlier I said by chance Eunice Dean called Howard Melrose. It seems once again the universe has orchestrated itself to put these two on a path towards each other. It has orchestrated it so that Eunice would accidentally call Melrose, which caused an entire series of events that pitted Dean and Melrose against each other. It is a set fact within the universe that these two will conflict. I mean, if you want to think about it as cosmic events, back in the original Deanverse, it seems the only reason Howard Melrose became a journalist is because he was just a visitor, or so happened to be a visitor, at the Lincoln Memorial whenever the Lincoln Looker was revealed. So it seems that in that timeline, again, the universe orchestrated itself to pit the two against each other. Because at that event in Lincoln Looker, Howard Melrose is labeled a visitor, and every time after that, he's labeled a journalist. It seems his experience with the Lincoln Looker led him on a life of journalism, and therefore a life in conflict with Dean. And in my first video, when I said that I think James Dean is a cosmic force of evil and the devil, and here the Cathonaut is explaining that James Dean is the yang to Howard Melrose's yin, and if Howard Melrose is a constant force for good, then that means Howard the Coward. Yes! Yes! I was right. I was right. Oh. Oh, you don't know how good that feels. You don't know how good that feels. Just the doubters, the hate, all the messages tell me I'm insane, that I'm weird, that I'm overthinking it, that it doesn't, that I'm being weird and crazy and conspiratorial for no reason. Well, look right there, Dean the Devil. Finally! I cannot explain to you how thrilled I am to put the hours into watching and rewatching the series, and then to make that first video and say Dean's the devil, and all the comments like, oh, you're just a conspiracy theorist, or you're just crazy, or you just want everyone to be evil religious symbolism. And you know what? You're right, okay, about all those things, but I'm still right too, and that's the important part. And as soon as the Cathonaut said Dean the devil, I was thrilled. I can go home at that point. I could end the video right here. I'm not going to, but I could, and I would get the satisfaction out of it. So, yeah, I was right. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I was right, and that's what matters. Effectively, the Cathonaut gives the two a second chance and says, try again, fools. And we get the note that grief can make you a monster. This is interesting because this is the same phrase we saw ascribed to the Crescent King in the Nixonverse, and now it's being ascribed to Dean. Again, the concepts of these cosmic forces or these set events that always have to happen, they're carried out with the Crescent King, and here carried out with James Dean. Our next video, Cliff Chaos, picks up 2 weeks after Dean's disappearance. Of course, the public doesn't know about the Cathonaut pulling James Dean out of reality to scold him, they just think he went missing. In Cliff Chaos, we're told that a large platform was built at the Statue of Liberty. There was no reason given for this, and the public began to ask questions. Then chain link fencing and chairs were placed along the platform, again at the base of the statue itself. At the beginning of this video, it says that all images containing graphic content would be excluded. And now, every time a picture is shown of what this platform looks like, the platform itself has been edited out. What was on this platform or what its purpose was remains a mystery. The public began to panic when workers began to cover the platform, fences, and area at the base of the statue in explosives. New York City began to evacuate, and the mass exodus caused a lot of problems. Several children went missing as in the run, they became separated from their families. Animals became very agitated and began attacking police officers and civilians at random. One dog even made it through the White House fence and attacked President Clift. However, here's the really weird note. So it says that the president was taken to the hospital, but then it refers to the president as she. This makes no sense because the name of the video is Clift Chaos, referring to President Montgomery Clift. And it was said a little bit earlier that Clift was president and James Dean is vice. So now, why is it saying that the president is a she and this is the picture that it uses for her? Is there an answer out there? Probably, perhaps. Am I going to look into it right now? No, I'm very tired and my brain's about to break, so we're just going to keep going. There's enough problems to deal with as is before wondering who this new mystery president is. Eventually, the explosives on the island are detonated, and while it destroys most of the plant life and structure around the Statue of Liberty itself, the platform is okay. The last mention we get before the broadcast cuts out is that a large spotlight was being used at the base of the Statue of Liberty. Now, is Clift attempting to get the Liberty Lurker out of there? Because we know that the Statue of Liberty is a gateway to the Horned Serpent. Are they trying to kill the Horned Serpent? Are they trying to get it out? Are they trying to feed it? Are they trying to go see it? Who knows? But I'm sure it's something to do with the Horned Serpent. Another thing you need to know about the Mr. Manicore channel and all is he had a community poll about what president should be elected in the running between Clift and a couple other people. And as you can imagine, the community voted for Clift to be president. And then after James Dean tried to fly a plane into Howard Melrose, he had another one saying if Dean should be punished for his actions, and the community said no. So here, Alex shows the results of that poll and then has Cathonaut A yell at us for our unwavering support of James Dean. And you know what? I'm with Cathonaut A here. I told you all he was the devil. I told you he was evil, and I told you we need to get rid of him, and you voted him president and said that he shouldn't receive any repercussions. So really, it's your fault. Although I'm pretty sure Cathonaut A stands for Cathonaut Alex, because at this point, Cathonaut A is kind of the substitute for the writer in this universe. As Cathonaut A says, he just had to stop the vice president from running himself into a teenager. At this point, Cathonaut A is trying to manipulate the strings to prevent humanity from destroying itself. He doesn't want a repeat of what happened in the Deanverse the last time, so this time he is pulling the strings to make sure everyone doesn't wipe themselves out. And he says that humanity will be saved, will no longer have to worry about annihilation, and the timeline will correct itself as soon as a true act of selfless kindness is performed. But as he says, that would take a miracle. Also, at the end of this episode, we get a message to Alex's dad. As mentioned earlier, his dad passed away. I talked about how that was relevant to the whole series. And it just simply says that he misses his dad and he wishes he could show him the recent episodes. And when I watched this on stream, it took me out. Again, thank you, Alex, for making this series. We now move on to our second to final episode, Arnoldson Alone. It says that the story comes from wood engravings found in the Babylon forest, and that this story, the story of Everett, will be narrated by an individual with AWS. So Everett, as mentioned in the caption of Washington Wonderland, made it out of Wonderland and into the Babylon forest. And this is his story that he scrawled on the trees around him. He was born in Wonderland. As mentioned during Virginia's shift through reality, he was seen to be left behind. We already know that at a young age he was taken care of by Cathonaut C, but as he grew, he became this amalgamation, this monster, seemingly nothing more than twigs and offshoots of what appears to be special trees and what little bit is left of his humanity, infused with the energy of Wonderland. After many years in Wonderland, he heard what sounded like a woman singing. After getting close, It seems to be Virginia, or at least her copy, singing a song. While he can't touch her, he simply stays near, as it seems that this copy of Virginia wants him to follow. Eventually, this copy leads him to a particular special tree, and whenever it makes contact with it, he is teleported and begins falling through a sort of abyss. Perhaps this abyss is a corner world, perhaps it's the same thing that Virginia fell through when she fell through the DC monument, but regardless, Everett travels for what feels like eons before he awakes in the Babylon forest. So Everett, again, was a child abandoned. He was taken care of by one person, Cathanot C, which he likely doesn't even remember. But, like, this poor child has known nothing but torment and suffering, never a companion other than the ghost of his mother. What a horrific existence. But his resolve is one to keep humanity from the suffering that he's known. Because as soon as he comes out into the Babylon forest, he sees that the Martian serpent is on its way. He refers to it as another hell, one that's coming for Earth. Remember, this Martian serpent is flying straight to the planet, and when it gets here, it's going to be bad. And Everett says that he is determined to stop it to make sure no one has to endure the same hell that he's endured all these years. Which, for one, it would be way too easy to take a character like Everett and just make him a villain, right? Someone was tortured and in a horrible condition their entire life, so they would want to torture others, right? But not Everett. Everett is determined to make sure no one has to suffer the same things he suffered. For the memory of his mother, for the memory of his father, he is going to do right by them. And that leads us to the final episode, at the moment, the final episode of the Monument Mythos, Freedom Forever. We see that this story is a book called The Death of President Dean. The description will clarify that it means Vice President Dean, but no one cares about vice presidents. So the story, The Death of President Dean, seems to be a retelling of how our Earth was saved from the Martian serpent. So we cut back to the events that occur right after Angel. If you'll remember, that episode ended with Freedom decapitating Angel. And remember how I said maybe Angel became a canyon crown? Well, here's the giant Angel Canyon crown. Of course, the Angel's intention in this moment is to die. Angel knows that if it fights Freedom, it's just going to destroy the world. So Freedom rears up its sword ready to destroy the Angel, but as it comes down, Everett steps out of the tree line to stop her. It seems that Virginia's copy knew either Everett's destiny or the way to save the universe or what have you. Virginia's copy knew the perfect moment to save Everett out of Wonderland and put him in this forest, because what Everett is about to do will save humanity as a whole. Freedom and Everett begin to fight, and as they do, Angel destroys Freedom's sword. Everett speaks to Angel, and that's when Freedom realizes that the two of them mean Freedom no harm. And as a matter of fact, when peering inside of Freedom, we see the two souls of her first victims, Nina and Thomas. Freedom, of course, is the combination between the soul of a captive slave as well as its sculptor Thomas and the little girl Nina. The three of them, in communication with each other, realize that these people never meant them any harm, and they want to go somewhere where no one will hurt them. So, Freedom, Everett, and the Angel fuse together to create a being of pure energy, or as the story calls it, a more perfect union. This phrase, of course, often being attributed to the United States, but here attributed to its symbols within the story finally joining together. Union flies into the clouds and flies directly into space to destroy this Martian serpent. All three of them are incredibly powerful beings made of pure energy between Wonderland and Giza glass and the particles created from Rockefeller's death ray. And together, it seems that they are strong enough that in the act of destroying themselves, they are able to stop the Martian serpent. After that, we see a video from Lauren Arnoldson and Mr. Squirrel, both of which are characters that were lost with the destruction of the Deanverse, but now, because of the selfless actions of Union and its members, are alive and well once again. And in Lauren's video, she is showing us a new constellation that can be found in the night sky, Manticore, or as it corrects her, Mr. Manticore. Lauren asks, "What are you made of?" And Mr. Manticore replies, "Good people." The constellation itself, made up of the 17 men and the one extra star to represent the members of the Air Force One Angel, Nina, Thomas, and Freedom, and of course, Everett Arnoldson. And as it shows all of them together in the night sky, we are once again shown the image of Virginia's painting together. Virginia Arnoldson imagined a better future, something beyond all of these horrors and nightmares that plagued humanity, something that meant more than the turmoil she knew, something where these people who loved and wanted the best for each other could be together at last. And now in Mr. Manticore, we have that in some small way. We see that Cathanaut A leaves our universe. As he said earlier, he would leave and humanity would be saved as soon as a pure act of selfless kindness was performed. And with the sacrifice of the members of Union, that act of kindness has been fulfilled. And it seems that, at least for now, humanity has been saved. The caption for this video has the final transition from Cathanaut A that simply says, "Goodbye, fools." No longer needing his hand of protection, it seems that for now, we're on the right track. That is, until at the final moments of the video, we get an audio message from Montgomery Clift.
I am Montgomery Clift, and I approve this message.
Stating that while everything may be safe for now and the universe is together, and some of our biggest characters of the series have had a proper send-off, there's still a threat, and there's still more mystery to be uncovered. And with that, at least for now, we have the end of the Monument Mythos. For one, let me just say, this ending is fantastic. We had so many continuous threads between, the souls trapped in Freedom, and then we got these souls in the Angel, and then we've got Everett, and then we've got this, and it's like all these through lines that we didn't know where they were going to end up, but they united together to defeat the threat that was threatening humanity. And all these people were subject and victim of the most horrible things you could possibly imagine. The men vaporized and made into this shape of the Angel. Everett abandoned as a baby in a world that couldn't be comprehended. And the souls of Freedom tormented and hunted down for their entire life. And then after their death, after they gave everything they had to stop the Martian, when Lauren Arnoldson asked, "What are you made of?" the only thing they can say is good people. In the midst of all the confusion, it's a very touching note and a beautiful one to leave off on. And you may ask yourself, is that the end of the entire series? Does it stop there? I don't think so. Alex has said a few times now that the series was over. He said it after season 2 ended. He said it after the Nixon-verse ended. And now he's saying that he'll probably make more. So I think he's definitely going to make more. Currently, Alex is making a series on the channel called The Ninja right now. I saw it whenever I was doing research for this, and I didn't watch it because everything I said over this entire video, I have no idea how long this is. Everything I said over this entire video was enough as is. I didn't need to bring in more information, but I did watch a little bit of the first episode, and it looks really good. So if you're interested in his kind of storytelling at all, I recommend you go check that out. Again, Mr. Manticore in the description. Great channel. He's doing great work. Go check him out. I feel guilty looking at how many views my first video got and then looking at his, and it's like, you all should be over there. You should be giving him the views. You turn my videos on and leave them on all night to just play through. Do that with his stuff. Probably with the volume off though, because it can be scary. But really, show him some love. At least go over there and comment that you appreciate his work, because I certainly do. And even if you don't, then tell him you do on my behalf, because he deserves it. He deserves the traction. And again, thank you, Alex, for everything you're doing. I can't wait to see where you go in the future. There were a couple more things I wanted to briefly mention, that there wasn't really a smooth place to mention them in the main video, but little things I found while scrolling through Alex's Q&A that I think are useful answers to the series. And even if there wasn't a place to mention them then, I want to do it now. So for one, remember the Suez Canal crab? Remember how far back that was? The giant crab that lifted up the ship and rammed it into the tower at Cairo? So it turns out that crab was an amalgamation of people and animals that have been killed in Wonderland. Remember how Virginia mentioned in Washington Wonderland that some people would try to climb the trees and they'd essentially get fried or like turn into like this mush of skin or whatever? Well, according to Alex, when you do that a lot and you eventually have this really big buildup of it, it, like anything else in Wonderland, can transfer back into our reality. And after that, it becomes excitable with things like radiation. So when the government used nukes to try to get it to move, it awoke all of this flesh particles And effectively, this giant conglomeration of flesh from dead people and animals that have wandered into Wonderland, it just picked up the cargo ship and walked until it hit the tower and fell over. He also clarified that there are likely more of those crabs out there. That's just the only one we've seen so far. And you can kind of think of the crab as like a monster from Dead Space. You know how in Dead Space the whole thing is like dead bodies get used as a necrotic material for the marker to make monsters effectively. That's kind of similar to what's happening here, only it's more incidental through the effects of Wonderland. Another is, he noted that it's not like the Angel or Freedom were powerful enough to destroy the world. It's that the Angel's power in combination with Freedom's Giza glass just kind of multiplied the power to the point that it could destroy the world. He didn't say this directly, but I'm pretty sure, given one of his answers to a question, that in Dean Disaster, whenever the sirens go off and make everyone deaf, those sirens are likely special trees, or at least harnessing the power of special trees in some way. You know, every time we see Wonderland or anything from the special trees, really, it's like really loud, like a siren blaring. That's how the sirens got so loud everyone went deaf, and some people died. Which again, goes back to my whole thing of Dean being the devil, because he used special trees to make everyone deaf, but I digress. At the end of Alcatraz Apocalypse, the season 2 finale, the video we see of the Earth exploding and the Horned Serpent breaking out, Alex says that was recorded by Cathonaut A, which makes sense of how the footage still exists, is that it exists from the one survivor who he knows like a reality hopper, other than the corner folk. I guess everyone who survived the Deanverse became those little corner folk creatures, which is kind of sad, I guess. He has said that the reason Richard Nixon is so powerful in the Nixonverse is because, one, he has the energy from the Deanverse or whatever, but he's also the flesh copy of Alcatraz, because remember, Alcatraz assimilated everyone, which is how he's the last son of Alcatraz is able to have the Alcatraz's ability to take over everything in a flesh mass, which he does in the Edge White paradox. Oh, this is an interesting one. So remember how in Rockefeller Revelation, the 17 men, whenever they made the death ray to shoot down the blimp with the crown in it, remember how it showed us the lens of that death ray and it was like a really weird shape or whatever, and that was never elaborated on? According to Alex, that is a skull of the Horned Serpent. And I immediately had questions like, what do you mean the skull? There's only one skull we've seen, and it's the one that the D-Day Night wore over in the Nixonverse. So how did these guys back in like the 1930s, 1940s, how did those guys have a, or was it 1920s? Whenever the Angel was created, my brain's broken. How did those guys have a Horned Serpent skull to use as a lens? According to Alex, the Horned Serpent had like tried to replicate itself or replicated itself in pieces or appendages, and maybe these individual appendages are like what the Liberty Lurker was, because if the Horned Serpent's big enough to be the entire Earth, ain't no way it's fitting out of the Statue of Liberty pedestal, right? Unless it has offshoots or appendages that are like smaller versions of itself, and that's what shot out of the pedestal. So it's one of those smaller renditions or pieces of the Horned Serpent. That piece's skull is what was used as a lens in the Rockefeller death ray, which explains why the lens was powerful enough to disintegrate all the men and turn them into the Air Force One Angel. I don't think that the Horned Serpent creates special trees. As a matter of fact, I think one element of that Monument Mythology video that was true is the idea that there are two entities, the tree and the serpent, throughout history. I think that the Horned Serpent does things that make more trees appear, but if anything, I think it's that the two are in conflict. For one, I don't think the special trees are evil. I think they're just a thing that exists, and if you mess with them, bad things will happen, in the same way that if you mess with electricity, you're going to get shocked. It's not that electricity's evil, it's just that you have to be careful with it. So I think maybe the Horned Serpent was attempting to spread itself or spread its reach or whatever, and the trees or whatever controls the trees, maybe the collective hive mind of the trees himself or whatever, were growing in places to stop him. So in other words, I don't think the Horned Serpent and the trees are on the same side. I think that the serpent does things that make more trees appear. There's a mention in the Nixonverse whenever we are listening to Alice Avenue talk about the story of the D-Day night, how he ran into James Dean and got the power to fly and blah, blah, blah. Just go watch the Nixon verse. There is a mention of a her who comes up, and Alex has said that it is the same her that is mentioned in, where did he say? Something to do with Virginia. I'm not going to go look through it right now. You can have your own fun with it. As a matter of fact, you know what? The Q&As that Matthew Schroeder typed up for me, I'll get his permission on it, but if he's cool with it, I'll link those in the description. So feel free to scroll through the Q&As to your heart's content, assuming they're down there. But somewhere, Alex mentioned that there is a connection between Virginia and the her that is mentioned in the Nixon verse during the D-Day night's origin story. So maybe Virginia is some greater creature that transcends time, but there's also the weird her with the president that's mentioned in Cliff Chaos, whoever that the female president is. I don't think it's the same her, but that's another weird mention of her, so maybe they're connected. There is the Washington Wanderer, which is definitely something related to Virginia, I think. Maybe Virginia's copy is the her that's mentioned. I don't know. Maybe her is just the embodiment of faith in general, like, or fate, I mean. Like, believe in fate, believe in, fate's destiny. Maybe that's the her they're referring to. Who knows? And also, in May's Movie Maker, this was a question I had all the way back in the first video, but it's answered now. Remember how, on the video, which I think it's Maya and Nathaniel, but it's at least just Maya recording, there is a map and it shows the cave they're in, and then there's a blurred out portion at the bottom. That is either an appendage or a gateway or something related to the horned serpent. The reason it was removed for, I just saw, okay, hold on. In May's Movie Maker, the reason that's blurred out is because it's a piece of a horned serpent, and whoever's making this doesn't want us to see something related to the horned serpent. So maybe in Cliff Chaos, this is real out there, probably not right. Maybe in Cliff Chaos, the reason the platform was blurred out from us watching now is because it also is either a picture or the visage or maybe even an altar or something for the horned serpent. So maybe whoever blurred that out doesn't want us to see pieces of it, because I'm sure, because Alex has confirmed that the one on the map in May's Movie Maker is the horned serpent or a piece of it or the gateway to it or something related to the horned serpent, right? Makes sense. These tunnels underneath the ground that lead to Maze and these areas that used to be fed and haven't been fed in a long time, pieces of the horned serpent. Makes sense. And we know that the Statue of Liberty is a gateway to the Horned Serpent, so maybe the platform, and the reason it's blurred out in Cliff Chaos, is because it's related to the Horned Serpent. Another thing about Cliff Chaos, remember how the president who switches presidents midway through, it says that the president, who we assume is Montgomery Clift, gets bit and then taken to the Walt Disney Hospital, and then after that, it switches over to she. So maybe, for one, the president gets bit and he's out of commission, and James Dean's gone, so maybe this is like the Speaker of the House or something. Who's the third in? I think it's the Speaker of the House is the third in chain to be president. So maybe because both are out of commission, that's why this woman takes over as president in that time. That would make sense. And Alex is phrasing it the way he is just to mess with us, which I wouldn't put past him. But I thought it was convenient that whenever this explosion happens, like right before, the president gets bit by a dog that slipped through the White House fence, and now he has to go sit in a hospital. That's shady. Why didn't he want to be in the presidency or whatever? Or maybe he wanted to be specifically at the Walt Disney Hospital. Who knows? Anything to do with Dean or Clift or any of that is evil, the devil. The Cath have not agreed with me. And me and Alex both think you all are dumb for liking Dean, because he's the devil. Man, these videos do something to me. The last thing I wanted to mention is there's a recurring theme throughout the entire series that maybe the horned serpent's evil, but not really. And even then it makes sense. So there's this recurring theme that nothing we're witnessing is really evil. The special trees aren't evil. Wonderland isn't evil. It's just a thing that exists. Like I said, it's like electricity or fire. Don't mess with it or you'll get burned. It doesn't mean fire's evil. It just is what it is. So people have been messing with special trees all the way back to Washington, trying to cut down a special tree. and then he gets placed in Wonderland, becomes the Horned Serpent and all that. There's this recurring theme that humanity messes with things they're not supposed to, and then bad things happen. You want to, like all the way back in Maze Movie Maker, the attacks on Maze only happen after James Dean threatens to, excuse me, I've been talking for so long my voice is giving out. The attacks only happen after humanity begins to attack special trees or find a way to destroy them. Humanity attacks special trees, humanity gets attacked. In 1969 is whenever the Dean disaster happened, where the sirens went off, which is the same year that we know, at least at that point, if not before, the government was using these giant statues like Freedom, not Freedom specifically because it was on the Capitol Dome at the time, I think, but maybe Freedom. They were using statues with Giza glass to cut people's heads off, and then the trees attack, supposedly, through Dean disaster. So I think that there's this recurring theme. Humanity puts their neck out further than they should, and they get hurt. So my prediction for the whole series, now that the universe hasn't blown up anymore, now that a lot of things have been dealt with, like, you know, Union went up to the sky, so all the members of Union are okay. And we're kind of on a more hopeful note, because season 2 ended, everyone's dead. But now people are alive, there's sacrifices, there's kindness, there's like good things happening. I think, my prediction is, the series will end with humanity cohabitating with special trees, with Wonderland, all that stuff. Like, humanity realizes these things exist, and it's something they're going to have to live with, not try to exploit. And I think that's where the series is eventually going. That's my prediction. Could be totally wrong. And if it is, that's fine. I was right about Dean being the devil, and I'm good. I can die happy now. James Dean is the devil. I win. But the real reason I win is because you all are here, you all are watching my video, and it really does mean the most. And I just want to say thank you for watching. Like I said, I really love this entire series. I think it's fantastic, and please, I really mean it. Even if you're afraid of it, even if you don't think you're that interested, if you've watched the video this long, go show Alex some love. He deserves it. Mr. Manicore in the description. Please check him out. Leave a like on the videos. If you enjoy them, comment, get him some engagement. The man deserves it. He is a talented artist, and he needs to go places. And again, Alex, thank you for making what you're making. I appreciate it. And everyone go check out Ninja. That series looks great. I'm going to watch it as soon as I'm done editing this. That's my final update. That's the update to the Monument Mythos. We did it. Like I said, first one's got over 12 million views, an insane number. It's all thanks to you guys. I really don't deserve it, but thank you for watching. And also, is everything okay at home? I mean it. But for real, thank you for watching. Thank you all so much for sticking around. Was there anything I wanted to say? I've spoken so much. I think I'm done. This outro can be short. That's fine. It's only gonna be a 4-hour video or something. Oh, word. Anyway, I've been recording a while. This is day 2 now. You've watched the sun go up and down. That's because it became a new day. But for real, thank you all for being here. You guys make it worth it. I say all this stuff in jest and as a joke. There's nothing on earth I'd rather be doing. And I get to do this thanks to you guys, and I appreciate it. With that, I'll get to editing it. Thank you, Caitlin, for editing this as always. You're the best. Love you. There was something. If you saw the clips from the live stream and thought it was fun, and was like, oh, I didn't know Wendigoon does live streams, go into the description or just search it. It's called Wendigang. It's my second channel. And I use that channel to do I know a lot of you know this, but I'm sure there's new people. Sub count keeps growing, thanks to everyone. I appreciate it. We're at 2.8 million now. It means the world. Thank you all. But it's called Wendigang. So instead of Wendigoon, just change the goon to gang. It's linked in the description. I will do interviews over there with some of the creators for this stuff. I should probably do one with Alex, come to think of it. I'll see if I can't get an interview out of him at some point. He's a great creator. I'd love to. Maybe after this one's out. But yeah, if it does happen, go to the description. I'll drop it down there. And if it doesn't, we'll go to the second channel anyway. I'll do semi-sporadic streams over there. Like, I reacted to the new Monument Mythos when it comes out. I react to new Mandela Catalog when they come out. And sometimes I just play games. I've got a couple of video game-based videos coming up in the future, so I'll be playing those games over there on that channel. But yeah, check out Winda Gang. I'll do live streams over there, and like I said, the occasional interview or whatnot. But yeah, that's where that comes from if you're interested in that. Cool projects on the way, and yeah, I believe that should do it. Again, check out Alex, Mr. Manticore. That's the most important thing to take away from this video. And the second most important thing to take away is I hope you enjoyed. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. With that, we should be done, but I just want to say thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!